When a bride in a torn wedding dress stepped off that train with nothing but tears and a sealed letter, every soul at the station turned away. Except one. A small boy broke free from his father's grip, his finger pointing straight at her trembling form. "That's my mama," he cried out, his voice slicing through the Wyoming wind like a blade. In that moment, a woman's shattered past collided with a rancher's buried grief, and a love they thought dead began to claw its way back to life. If you're watching from across the world, from New York to Tokyo, from London to Sao Paulo, stay with us until the very end. Comment below with your city name so I can see how far this story of redemption and second chances has traveled. Now, let me take you back to 1891, to a dust-covered station where nothing would ever be the same again. The locomotive's whistle tore through the autumn air like a woman's scream, and perhaps that was fitting, because a woman was indeed screaming, though silently, locked behind the cage of her own ribs, where no one could hear the sound of a heart breaking for the 1000th time. Amelia Ward pressed her forehead against the cold window of the passenger car, watching the golden prairie grass blur into rivers of wheat and honey. Her reflection stared back at her, hollow-eyed, ghostly, wearing a wedding dress that had once been beautiful, but was now little more than rags held together by desperate stitching and dried tears. The silver fabric, which had shimmered in candlelight 3 nights ago, was now stained with mud, sweat, and something darker near the hem that she didn't want to think about. The train was slowing. She could feel it in her bones, the way the rhythm of the wheels changed from a confident gallop to an uncertain stagger. Through the smudged glass, she saw it. A station that wasn't really a station at all. Just a wooden platform erected in the middle of absolute nowhere, surrounded by scrub brush and the kind of emptiness that made a person feel like they were the last soul on earth. "Sweetwater Junction," the conductor called out, his voice bored and nasal. 5-minute stop. Sweetwater Junction. Amelia's hands trembled as she gathered the pitiful bundle at her feet, a cloth sack containing everything she owned in this world. A change of underclothes, a hairbrush with half its bristles missing, a miniature silver locket that wouldn't open anymore, its clasp broken in a struggle she tried not to remember, and the letter. Always the letter, sealed with her father's crimson wax, the imprint of his ring pressed into it like a brand on cattle. She stood on legs that barely held her, gripping the seat back for support. The other passengers, a businessman with oil-slick hair, a woman in widow's black, a young couple who couldn't stop touching each other's hands, all pretended not to notice her. They had been pretending for the entire journey from Boston, averting their eyes from the bruises on her wrists, from the wild desperation in her face, from the wedding dress that announced her shame to anyone with eyes to see. A bride traveling alone. A woman without a husband. The scandal was written all over her, and decent people didn't acknowledge scandals. The conductor appeared at her elbow, his face professionally blank. "This your stop, miss?" She wanted to say no. She wanted to say she'd made a terrible mistake, that she'd ride this train to the very end of the line and step off into the Pacific Ocean if that's what it took. But her lips formed the word before her mind could stop them. Yes. "You got someone meeting you?" The question hung in the air between them. Did she? Was there anyone in this godforsaken corner of the world who would claim her, who would look at her ruined dress and haunted eyes and still say, "Yes, this one is mine. I'm expected," she whispered, which was not the same thing as being wanted, but it was all she had. The conductor helped her down the steps, the only kindness he'd shown her. And then the train was pulling away, leaving her standing alone on the platform, with her pitiful bundle and the wind tugging at her torn veil. The few people scattered around the station, cowhands waiting for supplies, a woman with 2 small children, an old man whittling on a bench, all stopped what they were doing to stare. Amelia felt their eyes like brands on her skin. She lifted her chin, trying to summon some scrap of dignity. But it was hard when your wedding dress was falling apart, and you hadn't slept in 3 days, and the only thing keeping you upright was the slim, desperate hope that maybe, just maybe, the words in her father's letter were true. "Your son lives. Make this right, or neither of you will see another dawn." The platform seemed to tilt under her feet. Amelia stumbled, catching herself against a wooden post. Her vision swam with exhaustion and hunger. She couldn't remember the last time she'd eaten, really eaten, not just nibbled at dry bread while her stomach churned with anxiety. The late afternoon sun beat down mercilessly, making the silver fabric of her dress shimmer mockingly, a beacon announcing to everyone, "Here is a woman who failed. Here is a bride no one wants." "You lost, lady." The voice came from her left, a young cowhand barely past boyhood, with kind eyes that quickly turned uncertain when he saw her face properly. Whatever he saw there made him step back, touching his hat brim in a gesture that was more escape than courtesy. "I'm—" Amelia's voice cracked. She swallowed, tasted dust and desperation, tried again. "I'm looking for— Is there a— Does anyone know a Rowan Callahan?" The name felt like swallowing glass. It had been 4 years since she'd spoken it aloud. 4 years since she'd let herself even think it without immediately drowning the thought in whatever numbing activities her father's house had offered. 4 years since the night everything had fallen apart, since the morning she'd woken up in a locked room with bars on the windows and her father standing over her with that letter, that damned letter that had stolen her life. "Forget him. He's forgotten you. Now sign this." The cowhand's eyes widened slightly. "Callahan? Sure, everyone knows him. Ranch about 6 miles northeast of here, but, ma'am, I don't think— Can you take me there?" "Ma'am, I ain't got a wagon, and even if I did, I can't just— Please." The word ripped out of her, raw and desperate. "Please, I have to— My son is there. My son." The cowhand looked deeply uncomfortable now, glancing around as if hoping someone else would step in and handle this increasingly awkward situation. "Ma'am, I don't know nothing about Mr. Callahan having any— I mean, there's a boy, sure, but that's him. That's my son, Tobias. His name is Tobias." She was crying now, hot tears cutting tracks through the dust on her cheeks, but she was beyond caring about dignity or propriety or what these strangers thought. "I know it's him. I know it. Please, you have to believe me. I haven't seen him since he was 6 months old. They took me away. They locked me up. They told me he was dead, but he's alive and I have to— Lady, you need to calm down." This from the woman with the 2 children, who was now herding her little ones away from the hysterical bride like Amelia was contagious. "You're causing a scene. I don't care about a scene." Amelia's voice rose, spiraling toward something that might have been laughter, or might have been madness. "My baby is out there, and I'm going to find him even if I have to walk every mile, even if my feet bleed, even if— Mama?" The word dropped into the chaos like a stone into still water, creating ripples of silence that spread outward until the entire platform had gone quiet. Amelia's breath stopped. Her heart stopped. Everything stopped, except for the source of that small, uncertain voice. A boy stood at the edge of the platform, half hidden behind a stack of supply crates. He couldn't have been more than 4 years old, with a shock of dark hair that caught copper highlights in the sun, and eyes the color of summer storms, gray-blue and deep and achingly, impossibly familiar. He wore patched overalls and a shirt that had been washed so many times it was more memory than fabric, and he clutched a wooden horse in one small fist, and he was staring directly at Amelia. "Tobias?" The name fell from her lips like a prayer, like a plea, like the only word that mattered in the entire universe. "Tobias, is that you?" The boy took a step forward, then stopped, looking back over his shoulder toward the general store entrance. "Papa said to wait, but—" His gaze swung back to Amelia, and something in his small face shifted. Recognition that shouldn't have been possible, couldn't have been possible, but was happening anyway. "You're sad." Amelia sank to her knees right there on the dusty platform, wedding dress pooling around her like spilled mercury, and held out her shaking hands. Yes, baby. I'm very sad. But seeing you makes it better." The boy tilted his head, studying her with the solemn intensity that only small children can manage. "You're wearing a fancy dress. Are you a princess?" A broken laugh escaped her. "No, sweetheart, I was supposed to be a bride, but that didn't work out the way everyone planned. My mama was supposed to come back." The words were matter of fact, but they hit Amelia like a physical blow. "Papa says she couldn't. Papa says sometimes people can't do what they promise, and that's just how the world is. Your papa is... Amelia's throat closed. She had to force the next words out. Your papa is Rowan Callahan? The boy nodded proudly. Papa's the strongest man in Wyoming. He can lift a whole hay bale over his head, and one time he punched a wolf. The last part was delivered with such conviction that Amelia almost smiled despite everything. I believe it, she whispered. Your papa was always very strong. Do you know him? I did. Once. A long time ago. The boy took another step closer, and Amelia could see details now that made her heart shatter and reform simultaneously. The small scar on his chin that hadn't been there when he was a baby, the way he favored his left foot slightly, the cowlick in his hair that she'd once spent hours trying to smooth down while he nursed. This was her son. Her son. Living and breathing and standing in front of her with Rowan's eyes and her smile and a childhood she'd missed completely. You smell like trains, the boy observed. And flowers, old flowers. Orange blossoms, Amelia said faintly. They were supposed to be for... She couldn't finish. Couldn't explain to this innocent child about forced marriages and locked rooms, and fathers who cared more about reputation than their daughters' souls. Tobias! The roar came from the direction of the general store, and Amelia's entire body went rigid. She knew that voice. It had haunted her dreams for 4 years, sometimes tender, sometimes angry, always just out of reach. She'd heard it whisper promises in the dark, heard it laugh with pure joy when Tobias was born, heard it break into jagged pieces the last time they'd spoken, when he'd said, If you don't love me anymore, just say it, just tell me the truth. And she'd lied. God help her, she'd lied because her father was standing right there with his hand on his pistol and his eyes promising murder if she didn't say exactly what he wanted to hear. I don't love you, Rowan. I never did. It was a mistake. Now he was striding toward them, and Amelia felt every muscle in her body scream at her to run, to hide, to do anything except face the man she'd destroyed. But she couldn't move. She was frozen on her knees in a ruined wedding dress, staring up at the boy who was her entire world, and she couldn't make herself stand or flee or even breathe properly. Rowan Callahan looked like 4 years had carved him out of granite and anger. He'd always been tall, 6'3" in his boots, but now he seemed to loom even larger, all hard muscle and harder edges. His dark hair was longer than she remembered, pulled back in a leather tie that couldn't quite contain it, and his face had lost every trace of boyish softness. This was a man who'd been through fire and come out forged in steel, and the way he was looking at her, like she was a ghost or a nightmare, or something he couldn't quite make himself believe was real, made Amelia want to sink into the platform boards and disappear. Papa, look! Tobias ran to his father, grabbing his hand and pulling him toward Amelia. There's a sad princess, and she knows you. Rowan stopped dead. The color drained from his face so completely that for a moment Amelia thought he might actually faint, which would have been absurd because this was a man who'd once been thrown from a horse at full gallop and gotten up laughing. But he swayed on his feet, his free hand reaching out to brace against a post, and his lips formed her name, even though no sound came out. Amelia. It wasn't a question. It wasn't even really a statement. It was just her name, spoken like a wound, and the sound of it in his voice, rough and broken and edged with something that might have been rage or grief or both, made her want to weep all over again. Rowan, She tried to stand and stumbled, her legs refusing to cooperate. I couldn't. You're supposed to be married. The words were flat, emotionless, but his eyes, those storm-gray eyes that used to look at her like she hung the moon, were blazing. Your father sent word 2 years ago, said you'd made a good match back east, said you were happy. I wasn't. The confession burst out of her. I'm not. I've never been happy, not for one single day since they took me away from you. A muscle in his jaw twitched. They. As if you had no choice, as if you weren't the one who looked me in the eye and said, Papa, why are you angry? Tobias's small voice cut through the tension. The princess is crying harder now. Rowan's expression flickered, a moment of raw pain before the granite mask slammed back into place. He looked down at his son, and when he spoke again, his voice was carefully controlled. Go inside, Tobias. Ask Mr. Henderson for a peppermint stick. Tell him I'll settle up later. But now, son. Tobias hesitated, looking between his father and the strange woman in the wedding dress. But something in Rowan's tone brooked no argument. He trudged toward the store, casting worried glances back over his shoulder. The moment the boy was out of earshot, Rowan turned back to Amelia, and the fury he'd been holding back broke free. "How dare you?" he said, his voice low and shaking. "How dare you show up here wearing that, playing on our son's sympathy after you—" "I didn't abandon him!" The words exploded out of Amelia. She managed to get to her feet, though she was still unsteady, still swaying. "I didn't leave. They dragged me away. My father locked me in that house for 3 years, Rowan. 3 years. And when I finally fought my way out, he forced me into a marriage I never wanted, to a man I didn't even know, and the only reason I went through with it was because he said—" Her voice broke. "He said if I didn't, he'd make sure I never saw Tobias again. He said he'd kill you both." Rowan's face was unreadable. "You expect me to believe that?" "I don't expect anything. I know what I said to you that day. I know I broke your heart. But it was the only way to save your life. My father had a gun, Rowan. He was going to—" "Stop!" He held up a hand, his eyes closing briefly. "Just stop. I can't do this. Not here. Not now." "Then when?" Desperation made her bold. She stepped toward him, close enough to smell the familiar scent of wood smoke and sage that clung to his clothes. "When will you listen? When will you let me explain?" "Maybe never," he said, and the coldness in his voice was worse than anger would have been. "You made your choice. I made mine. I built a life for our son without you, a good life, stable, safe, and I'll be damned if I let you walk back in and destroy it just because you had a change of heart about whatever rich husband you ran off to marry." "I didn't run!" Amelia was shouting now, aware that the entire station was watching but beyond caring. "I was taken, and I've spent every single day of the last 4 years trying to find a way back. Do you think I wanted to marry Doyle Crane? Do you think I wanted to sign my name on that marriage certificate while his friends held me down and my wrist was so badly bruised I could barely hold the pen?" Something flickered in Rowan's eyes, doubt maybe, or the faintest hint of uncertainty, but it was gone before she could name it. "If that's true, where's this husband now? Why are you here alone?" "I ran." The simple truth of it echoed across the platform. 3 days ago, right after the ceremony, I ran. There was a window without bars, finally, and I took my chance. I stole this dress and a ticket voucher from one of the guests, and I ran. And I came here because— Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Because if there was even a chance that my son was still alive, I had to find him. Even if you hate me, even if you never forgive me, I had to see him once. Just once." Rowan stared at her for a long moment, and she could see him wrestling with himself, the part that wanted to believe her fighting the part that had spent 4 years learning to live without her. Finally he spoke, and his voice was tired. "You can't stay." "What?" "You heard me. You can see Tobias because I won't be cruel enough to deny him that. But then you have to go. Back to Boston, back to wherever. I don't care. But you can't stay here and confuse him with stories about being his mother when you haven't been here for— "I am his mother!" Amelia's voice cracked with anguish. "I gave birth to him. I nursed him. I sang him to sleep every night for 6 months before they ripped him out of my arms. You can hate me, Rowan. You can despise me, but don't you dare tell me I'm not his mother." "Then where were you?" The question was quiet, but it hit like a hammer. "Where were you when he cried for you every night for months? Where were you when he got sick last winter and I thought I'd lose him? Where were you for his first steps, his first words, every single milestone that you should have been there for?" "I'll tell you where. Living your life back east, married to some rich man, probably sleeping in silk sheets while our boy called out for a mama who never came." "I was in hell." The scream tore out of her throat, raw and primal. "I was locked in a room with bars on the windows. I was starved when I wouldn't comply. I was beaten when I tried to escape. I wrote letters, dozens of letters, begging anyone who'd listen to help me, to tell you the truth, but they were all intercepted. And when I finally did get out, when I finally found a way to send word, the message came back that you'd moved on, that you had a new life and didn't want to hear from me ever again. I never got any messages. Rowan's voice had gone quiet, dangerous. Not one. Because my father made sure you wouldn't. He paid people off, destroyed evidence, did whatever it took to keep us apart. And it worked. It worked so well that even now, standing here in front of you, you don't believe me. The silence that followed was suffocating. Amelia could see people pretending not to watch while hanging on every word, could see the station agent peering out from his office, the cowhands whispering among themselves, the woman with the children hurrying away as if scandal was contagious. And then Tobias's voice, small and frightened, came from the doorway of the general store. "Papa? Why is everyone yelling?" Rowan's expression shuddered immediately. He turned to his son, forcing something that might have passed for a smile. "It's all right, son. Just grown-up talk. Come on, let's get you home." "What about the princess?" She has somewhere else to be." "But Papa, she's crying again, and she doesn't have a horse or a wagon or anything." Tobias's little face was creased with worry. "We can't just leave her here. That's not what Mama would have wanted." The irony of the statement hit Amelia like a physical blow. Here was her son, her own child, worried about what his absent mother would have wanted, not knowing that absent mother was standing right in front of him. She opened her mouth to speak, but Rowan cut her off with a look that could have frozen fire. "Tobias, go wait by the wagon. Now!" Something in his tone made the boy obey without further protest. He cast one last worried glance at Amelia before scurrying off, wooden horse still clutched in his hand. Rowan waited until Tobias was out of earshot before speaking again, his voice low and hard. "You want to know the truth? The real truth? I don't care if your story checks out. I don't care if you were locked up or forced or any of it, because 4 years ago, you had a choice. You could have fought harder. You could have trusted me to protect you instead of pushing me away. But you didn't, and our son paid the price." "That's not fair," Amelia whispered. But even as she said it, she could see his point, could see how it must have looked from his perspective. The woman he loved suddenly turning cold, claiming she'd never cared, disappearing without explanation. 4 years was a long time to live with that kind of betrayal. "Fair?" Rowan's laugh was bitter. "You want to talk about fair? Fine. Here's what's fair. You can see him, once. One visit, supervised, at my ranch. And then you leave and you don't come back. That's more than fair given what you put us through. One visit is all you're getting." He turned to leave, then paused, looking back at her with eyes that held nothing but cold finality. "The ranch is 6 miles northeast. Red gate, white fence posts. Be there tomorrow at noon if you're serious about this. Don't be late. And don't make me regret this." He walked away before she could respond, his bootsteps heavy on the wooden platform. Amelia watched him swing up onto a wagon where Tobias waited, watched him ruffle their son's hair with a gentleness that made her heart ache, watched the wagon pull away in a cloud of dust until they were just shapes on the horizon. And then she was alone again. The platform had emptied during their confrontation, everyone suddenly remembering urgent business elsewhere. Only the old man whittling on his bench remained, and he met her gaze with something that might have been sympathy. "You need somewhere to stay, miss?" Amelia looked down at herself, at the ruined wedding dress, at the dust and tears and exhaustion written all over her. I don't have any money." "Didn't ask about money." He jerked his chin toward the far end of the street. "Widow Henderson runs a boarding house. Mention my name, Bill Crandall, and she'll give you a room for the night. Won't be fancy, but it'll be clean and safe." "Why would you help me?" The question came out more suspicious than grateful, but Amelia had learned the hard way that kindness often came with strings attached. The old man shrugged, resuming his whittling. "Because I was there the day Rowan Callahan came to town with a 6-month-old baby and no explanation of where the mama was. Saw how broken he looked, and I'm thinking maybe there's more to your story than a first glance would tell. Besides," he squinted up at her, "you got the look of someone who's been through the fire. Seems only Christian to offer a bucket of water. Amelia felt tears threatening again, but she blinked them back. She'd cried enough for one day, for one lifetime. Thank you, she managed. Truly, thank you. She gathered her pitiful bundle and made her way down the dusty street, past the general store and the saloon and the small church with its white steeple pointing toward a sky that was starting to turn the color of old gold. The boarding house was exactly what she'd expected, a two-story frame building with a sagging porch and curtains that had once been white, but were now the color of weak tea. Widow Henderson turned out to be a woman in her 60s with steel-gray hair pulled into a severe bun and eyes that missed nothing. She looked Amelia up and down, taking in the wedding dress and the dirt and the obvious exhaustion, and then simply nodded. Bill sent you? Yes, ma'am. Room's $2 a week, meals included. Since you look like you couldn't pay 2 cents, let alone $2, we'll work something out. You can help with the washing until you get on your feet. Fair? More than fair, Amelia's voice cracked. I don't know how to thank you. Don't thank me yet. You'll earn your keep. I run a respectable house, and I expect respectable behavior. No men in your room, no drinking, no causing trouble. We clear? Crystal. Good. Widow Henderson's expression softened slightly. Bathroom's down the hall. There's hot water in the tank if you want a bath. God knows you look like you could use one. Your room's the second door on the left. I'll bring you up some supper in an hour. The bath was pure heaven. Amelia sank into the copper tub and let the hot water soak away 3 days of train grime, though it couldn't touch the accumulated grief of 4 years. She scrubbed at her skin until it was pink and raw, washed her hair 3 times, and still didn't feel clean. The wedding dress lay in a soggy heap on the floor, and she looked at it with something approaching hatred. That dress represented everything she'd lost, everything she'd been forced to become. She wanted to burn it, to tear it into tiny pieces, to throw it out the window and watch it blow away across the prairie. But she didn't, because it was all she had. Eventually, she climbed out of the cooling water and wrapped herself in a thin towel that smelled like lye soap and sunshine. In her room, barely bigger than a closet, but blessedly private, she found a clean shift and a wool dress laid out on the narrow bed. They were clearly cast-offs, mended in multiple places, but they were clean and whole and about her size. Widow Henderson's doing, no doubt. Amelia dressed slowly, her body feeling like it belonged to someone else. Every movement was deliberate, careful, as if she might shatter into pieces if she moved too quickly. When she was done, she sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the wall, trying to process everything that had happened. She'd seen him, her son, her baby. Living and breathing and so beautiful it hurt to look at him. He had Rowan's eyes and her smile and a sweet innocence that the world hadn't yet corrupted. And tomorrow, she'd see him again. Just once, Rowan had said. But once was infinitely more than the nothing she'd had for 4 years. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Widow Henderson entered with a tray bearing soup, bread, and weak tea. She set it on the small table by the window and studied Amelia with those sharp eyes. You in some kind of trouble, girl? The worst kind, Amelia admitted. There didn't seem to be any point in lying. The kind that follows you no matter how far you run. Does it have a name? Several. My father, my husband. The word tasted like poison. And a past I can't seem to escape no matter how hard I try. Widow Henderson nodded slowly. And the boy? The one everyone's whispering about? He's mine. The words came out fierce, protective. My son. I know no one believes me, but he's mine, and I didn't leave him by choice. I believe you. Amelia's head snapped up. What? I said I believe you. I've lived long enough to recognize a woman who's been broken by men who think they own her. You got that look. And I was at the church social 4 years ago when Rowan Callahan showed up with a baby and a story that didn't quite add up. He said the mama died, but he wouldn't meet anyone's eyes when he said it. Made me wonder. She didn't die. Amelia's voice was hollow. She was just dead to him. There's a difference. Not much of one, from his perspective. Widow Henderson moved toward the door, then paused. Word of advice? Don't expect him to forgive you easy. That man loved you like I've rarely seen, and when you left, or when he thought you left, it near about killed him. He's built walls higher than heaven to protect himself and that boy. You want in, you're going to have to tear those walls down brick by brick, and he's not going to make it easy." "I don't expect easy," Amelia said softly. "I just expect a chance." "Then I hope you get it. God knows we could all use a little more hope in this world." The widow left, closing the door gently behind her. Amelia forced herself to eat the soup even though she had no appetite, to drink the tea even though it was bitter, to do all the normal human things that people did to keep themselves alive. And then, as the sun set and painted the sky in shades of blood and gold, she knelt beside the narrow bed and prayed. She prayed for strength, for courage, for the words to make Rowan understand, for the chance to hold her son just once, to hear him laugh, to memorize every detail of his face so that when she was forced to leave, because she would be forced to leave, she could see that now. She'd have something real to hold on to instead of just faded memories and might-have-beens. And she prayed that somehow, impossibly, miraculously, there might be a way forward. A way to undo the damage her father had done, to rebuild what had been shattered, to create something new from the ruins of what they'd once had. It was a foolish prayer, a desperate prayer, the kind of prayer that rarely got answered in any meaningful way, but it was all she had left. As darkness fell over Sweetwater Junction, Amelia lay in the narrow bed and listened to the sounds of the boarding house settling around her, creaking floorboards, distant voices, the wind rattling the windows. Tomorrow she would see her son again. Tomorrow she would face the man she'd loved and lost. Tomorrow everything would change, one way or another. She just had to survive until noon. The sun rose over Wyoming like a judgment, harsh and unforgiving, and Amelia woke with her heart already racing. She'd barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Tobias's face, heard Rowan's cold voice telling her she had one chance, and one chance only. Now that chance was hours away, and she had no idea how to prepare for it. Widow Henderson had left a basin of water outside her door, still warm, along with a small mirror and a comb. Amelia stared at her reflection as she worked the tangles from her hair, barely recognizing the woman looking back at her. 4 years ago, she'd been soft and hopeful, a girl who believed love could conquer anything. The woman in the mirror had harder edges, shadows under her eyes that no amount of sleep would erase, and a wariness that came from learning too many painful lessons. She braided her hair with trembling fingers, pinned it up the way she used to before everything fell apart, and put on the mended dress Widow Henderson had provided. It was brown wool, serviceable and plain, the kind of dress a rancher's wife might wear. The irony wasn't lost on her. Downstairs, the boarding house dining room smelled of coffee and frying bacon. 3 other residents sat at the long table, 2 men who looked like ranch hands, and an older woman with kind eyes who introduced herself as Mrs. Patterson. They all looked at Amelia with varying degrees of curiosity, but no one asked questions. Small mercies. "You'll need to eat," Widow Henderson said, placing a plate in front of her. "It's a 6-mile walk to the Callahan place, and you look like a strong wind could blow you over." "I can't walk 6 miles in—" Amelia looked down at the leather boots she'd borrowed, already tight on her swollen feet. The thought of walking that distance made her want to weep. "Bill Crandall's taking his wagon out that way around 11. He'll give you a ride if you meet him at the livery." The widow poured coffee, her movements brisk and efficient. And before you ask why everyone's being so helpful, it's because word travels fast in a small town. Half of Sweetwater knows your story by now, or some version of it, and opinions split about 50-50 on whether you're a wronged woman or a troublemaker. I'm in the wronged woman camp for what it's worth. "Thank you," Amelia whispered. She forced down eggs and bacon that tasted like sawdust in her mouth, drank coffee that was too strong and too bitter, and tried not to watch the clock on the mantel counting down the minutes until 11. When it was finally time to leave, Mrs. Patterson pressed a small package into her hands. "Cookies," she explained, "for the boy. Children always respond better to adults who come bearing sweets." Amelia's throat closed. "I don't know what to say." "Don't say anything. Just don't waste this chance." Mrs. Patterson squeezed her hand once, firm and warm. "Some of us only get one." Bill Crandall was waiting at the livery with a wagon that had seen better days and a horse that looked even older than he was. He helped Amelia up onto the bench seat without comment, then clicked his tongue at the horse. They rolled out of town at a pace that made her want to scream with impatience. Callahan's a good man, Bill said after a mile of silence. Hard worker, honest, does right by his boy and his neighbors. Whatever happened between you two, he's done his best to move past it. I know he has. Amelia watched the prairie roll by, endless and golden in the late morning light. I'm not here to disrupt his life. I need to see my son. That boy's his whole world. You heard him. Rowan will destroy you. Don't matter if you're the boy's mama or the Queen of England, just so we're clear. We're clear. She'd expected nothing less. A man who'd raised a child alone for 4 years, who'd built a life from nothing. He'd protect that child with everything he had. She couldn't fault him for it. She could only hope he'd give her enough time to prove she wasn't a threat. The Callahan Ranch appeared on the horizon like something from a dream she'd forgotten she had. The red gate Bill had mentioned was weathered but sturdy, flanked by white fence posts that marked a property line stretching as far as she could see. Beyond the gate, a dirt road wound through pasture land where cattle grazed, leading to a house that was smaller than she'd imagined but somehow more real. It was a simple structure, wood frame, probably 2 bedrooms, with a porch that wrapped around 3 sides and a stone chimney rising from the roof. The kind of house you built when you cared more about shelter than show. Behind it stood a barn in better repair than the house, a chicken coop, and several outbuildings she couldn't identify. Everything spoke of hard work and careful maintenance, of a man who took pride in what he'd built. Bill stopped the wagon at the gate but didn't get down. You want me to wait? No. Amelia climbed down, her legs shaking. Thank you for the ride, but I don't know how long this will take. Long walk back if it goes poorly. I'll manage. She'd walked farther in worse circumstances. 6 miles was nothing compared to the distance she'd already traveled. Bill studied her for a long moment, then nodded. Good luck, miss. For what it's worth, I hope you get your boy back. The wagon rattled away, leaving her alone at the gate. Amelia took a deep breath, pushed it open. It swung smoothly on well-oiled hinges, and started up the road. Each step felt like walking through deep water, heavy and slow. Her heart hammered so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. She was halfway to the house when she heard it, the sharp, rhythmic crack of an axe splitting wood. The sound came from behind the barn, steady and methodical, and she followed it without thinking, rounded the corner and stopped dead. Rowan had his back to her, shirtless despite the autumn chill, bringing the axe down with controlled fury. Each strike split a log clean through, and he moved with the kind of fluid precision that spoke of endless practice. Sweat gleamed on his shoulders despite the cool air, and his muscles bunched and released with every swing. She could see old scars she'd never seen before, a long one across his ribs, another on his shoulder blade, and new calluses on hands that had once been softer. This was what 4 years had done to him, turned him into something harder, sharper, carved away everything soft until only the essential remained. He must have sensed her presence because he froze mid-swing, the axe suspended in the air. For 3 heartbeats, he didn't move. Then he lowered the axe slowly and turned to face her. You're early. His voice was flat, emotionless. He reached for a shirt hanging on the fence and pulled it on, not bothering to button it. I said, noon. I know, I'm sorry, I couldn't wait. She twisted her hands together, hating how nervous she sounded. Where's Tobias? Inside doing his letters. Rowan picked up the axe again, positioned another log on the chopping block. You can see him when I'm done here. He swung. The axe bit deep, cleaving the wood in 2. The halves fell away, and he positioned another log without looking at her. How long will that take? However long it takes. Swing, crack, split. I've got a winter's worth of wood to get through, and I'm not stopping just because you showed up. Amelia watched him work, understanding what he was really doing. This wasn't about the wood. This was about control, about making her wait, about proving that he didn't dance to her tune anymore. She could accept that. She'd accept almost anything for the chance to see Tobias again. Can I help? The axe paused. Rowan turned to look at her, his expression somewhere between disbelief and contempt. You want to help me chop wood? I want to do something other than stand here watching. And you're right, winter's coming. I can stack what you split. You're wearing a borrowed dress and can barely stand upright from exhaustion. You'd last 5 minutes. Try me. Something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, maybe, or reluctant respect. He jerked his chin toward the growing pile of split logs. Stack them by the barn, bark side down, tight rows. Can you manage that? Yes. She moved to the woodpile and began working, ignoring the way her back immediately protested, the way her hands, soft from 4 years of enforced idleness, weren't suited for rough bark and splinters. She stacked logs the way he'd directed, focusing on the simple physical task, letting the rhythm of it calm her racing thoughts. They worked in silence for what felt like hours, but was probably less than one. The only sounds were the axe falling, wood splitting, and the occasional grunt of effort from Rowan. Amelia's hands were bleeding by the time they finished, torn by rough bark and sharp edges, but she didn't stop, didn't complain, just kept stacking until every piece was in place. When the last log was stacked, Rowan finally set down the axe. He looked at the neat rows she'd created, then at her bleeding hands, and something in his face shifted, not softening exactly, but thawing, just slightly. "You always were stubborn," he said quietly. "I learned from the best." She wrapped her hands in her skirt, trying to stop the bleeding. "You were the one who taught me that sometimes you just have to put your head down and push through." "I taught you a lot of things." His voice went hard again. "Guess some lessons didn't stick." "Rowan, he's inside, like I said." He walked past her toward the house, not waiting to see if she'd follow. "But we're setting ground rules first. You understand?" Amelia hurried after him, her heart in her throat. "Whatever you need, I'll agree to anything." He stopped at the porch steps, one boot on the bottom riser, and turned to look at her with eyes that held nothing but cold calculation. "You don't tell him you're his mother. Not today. Not ever, unless I say otherwise." The words hit like a physical blow. "But those are my terms. Take them or leave." His jaw was set, immovable as stone. "He's 4 years old, Amelia. He doesn't remember you. He has a life, a routine, a sense of security. I won't have you walking in and destroying that just to make yourself feel better. I don't care what you're trying to do. I care about protecting my son, our son," he corrected, and the admission seemed to cost him. "If you want to see him, you're a friend. Someone passing through town, nothing more. And if he asks about his mother, you don't answer. I answer. Clear?" It felt like swallowing broken glass, but she nodded. "Clear." "And when this visit is over, you leave. You go back to wherever you came from, and you don't come back. You don't write. You don't send gifts. You don't insert yourself into his life. You had your chance to be his mother, and you—" He stopped himself, but the unspoken words hung heavy between them. "And you chose not to be." "I didn't choose this," Amelia said softly. "I know you don't believe me, but I didn't. Doesn't matter what I believe. What matters is what's best for Tobias." He mounted the steps, his hand on the door. "You ready?" She wasn't. She'd never be ready for this. To see her son and pretend to be a stranger, to smile and make small talk when all she wanted was to gather him in her arms and never let go. But she nodded anyway, because this was all she was going to get. Rowan opened the door and called out, "Tobias, we've got company." The sound of small feet running preceded the boy himself, who appeared in the doorway with his wooden horse still clutched in one hand and his face alight with curiosity. When he saw Amelia, his eyes widened. "The princess came back." "She's not a princess, son. She's—" Rowan hesitated, clearly struggling with what to call her. "She's Miss Ward. She's visiting from out of town." "But you're wearing a normal dress now," Tobias said, studying Amelia with the intense focus only children could manage. "What happened to your fancy one?" "It needed to be cleaned," Amelia managed, her voice only shaking slightly. "I'm afraid I got it quite dirty traveling on the train." "Papa says trains are dirty. He says that's why we take the wagon when we go to town." Tobias stepped closer, tilting his head. "Did you really know my mama?" The question was innocent, but it felt like a knife between her ribs. Amelia glanced at Rowan, who was watching her with an expression that clearly said, "Remember the rules." She swallowed hard and knelt down to Tobias's level. I knew her a little bit, she said carefully. A long time ago. What was she like? She loved you more than breathing. She would have died for you. She did die in a way, the day they took you from her. But she couldn't say any of that, so instead she said, she was kind and brave, and she loved you very, very much. Papa says that too. Tobias considered this, then held out his wooden horse. Do you want to see Ranger? Papa made him for me. He's the best horse in all of Wyoming. Amelia took the offered toy with shaking hands, studying the careful carving, the smooth finish that spoke of hours of patient work. He's beautiful. Your papa is very talented. He can make anything. He made me a whistle once, but I lost it in the creek. Tobias said this without any particular sadness, just a statement of fact. Are you going to stay for lunch? We're having stew. If your father says it's all right. She looked up at Rowan, who was still standing in the doorway like a sentinel. His face was unreadable, but after a moment he gave a short nod. She can stay for lunch. The next few hours were the strangest of Amelia's life. She sat at the small kitchen table, rough-hewn but sturdy, probably built by Rowan's own hands, and watched her son chatter about his life while Rowan moved around the kitchen with surprising domestic competence. He heated the stew, sliced bread, poured milk for Tobias, and coffee for the adults, all with the efficiency of someone who'd been doing it alone for years. The house was small but clean, everything in its place. Simple furniture, mostly handmade. A few books on a shelf, more than she'd expected, including some that looked like they'd been well read. Tobias's drawings pinned to one wall, childish but earnest. Horses and chickens, and a stick figure man who was clearly Rowan. No women in any of the pictures. No mothers. Miss Ward brought you cookies, Rowan said, and Amelia realized with a start that she'd left Mrs. Patterson's package by the woodpile. She started to rise, but Rowan held up a hand. I'll get them. Finish your stew. He disappeared outside, and Amelia was suddenly alone with Tobias. The boy kicked his feet under the table, too short to reach the floor, and studied her with those heartbreakingly familiar eyes. Are you sad again? He asked. You look sad, like yesterday. I'm not sad right now, Amelia lied. I'm happy, because I'm having lunch with you. Why does that make you happy? You don't even know me. Out of the mouths of babes, she searched for an answer that wouldn't break Rowan's rules. Sometimes people make you happy just by being themselves. You seem like a very nice boy. Papa says I'm too curious for my own good, and that I ask too many questions. Am I asking too many questions now? No, sweetheart. Ask all the questions you want. Okay. He took a big bite of stew, chewed thoughtfully, then swallowed. Why were you crying at the station? Yesterday, I mean. Papa says grown-ups don't cry unless something real bad happened. Amelia felt Rowan return before she saw him, his presence filling the doorway. She chose her words carefully. I was crying because I'd lost something very important to me, and I didn't know if I'd ever find it again. Did you find it? She looked at the boy, her son, her heart, her entire reason for surviving 4 years of hell, and felt tears threatening again. Yes, she whispered. I think I did. Rowan set the package of cookies on the table with more force than necessary. Tobias, why don't you take your stew out to the porch? It's a nice day. But we have company. Now, son. The boy knew that tone. He took his bowl and scampered outside, casting curious looks back over his shoulder. The moment he was gone, Rowan turned on Amelia with barely controlled fury. What did I tell you? I didn't break any rules. He asked questions. I answered them carefully. You're looking at him like you want to swallow him whole, like you're trying to memorize every detail so you can take it with you when you leave. You think he doesn't notice that? You think I don't? I'm sorry. The words came out broken. I'm trying, Rowan. I'm trying so hard to follow your rules, but he's my son, and I've missed 4 years of his life, and I don't know how to... Then maybe you shouldn't be here. He braced his hands on the table, leaning toward her, his voice low and harsh. Maybe this was a mistake. Maybe I should send you away right now before you do any more damage. Please. Amelia stood, her hands reaching for him before she could stop herself. She caught his wrist, felt him go rigid under her touch. Please don't. I'll do better. I'll be more careful. Just give me the rest of today. That's all I'm asking. You said I could have one visit. Let me have it. He stared at her hand on his wrist, and for a moment something flickered across his face. Memory, maybe, of all the times she'd touched him with love instead of desperation. Then he pulled away, putting distance between them. Finish your stew, then you can spend an hour with him outside. But I'm staying within sight the whole time. And if I think you're getting too close, too emotional, I'm ending this. Understood? Understood. The hour that followed was both heaven and torture. Tobias showed her everything: the chickens, the barn cats, his favorite climbing tree, the creek where he'd lost his whistle. He chattered non-stop, asking questions about where she came from, what Boston was like, whether she'd ever seen the ocean. Amelia answered as best she could, careful to keep her emotions in check, aware of Rowan watching from the porch like a hawk. Can you climb trees? Tobias asked, already scrambling up the lower branches of an old oak. I used to be quite good at it, Amelia admitted, when I was your age. Show me. She looked at the tree, then at Rowan, who shrugged as if to say your funeral. The borrowed dress wasn't made for climbing, but she hitched it up and followed Tobias into the lower branches. It was harder than she remembered, her body weak from years of disuse, her hands still bleeding from the wood, but she managed to pull herself up to the branch where Tobias sat. You did it! He clapped his hands with delight. Papa said Boston ladies don't climb trees. This Boston lady does. She settled next to him, close enough to feel his warmth, and for a moment allowed herself to just be. To sit in a tree with her son and feel the autumn breeze and pretend that this was normal, that she had every right to be here. I like you, Tobias announced. You're not like the other ladies in town. They're all worried about getting dirty. Getting dirty builds character, Amelia said, echoing words Rowan had once said to her a lifetime ago. That's what Papa says, Tobias bounced excitedly, making the branch shake. You and Papa think the same about lots of things, I bet. We used to, Amelia said softly, then caught herself. I mean, when I knew him, before. Before what? Before everything changed. Tobias went quiet for a moment, kicking his feet against the branch. Then, in a smaller voice, do you think my mama's ever coming back? The question drove straight through her heart. Amelia looked down to where Rowan stood, and even from this distance she could see the tension in his shoulders, could see him waiting to see how she'd answer. She thought about lying, about saying something safe and non-committal, but she'd had enough of lies. I think, she said carefully, that your mama never really left. I think she's been trying to come back to you every single day since she had to go away. And I think, her voice cracked, I think she loves you more than anything in the whole world, and she's so sorry she couldn't be here. Tobias looked at her with those storm-gray eyes, far too wise for 4 years old. That's what Papa says, too. But he looks sad when he says it. Maybe that's because it's a sad thing, missing someone you love. Do you miss someone? Yes. 2 people. And they're both right here. But I can't have either of them. Yes, she whispered. Very much. Is that why you were crying? Yes, sweetheart. That's why. He nodded solemnly, then reached out and patted her hand with his small one. The gesture was so tender, so unexpectedly kind that Amelia had to bite her lip to keep from sobbing. Papa says crying is okay sometimes. He says it helps wash the hurt away. Your papa is a smart man. The smartest. Tobias brightened again, his sadness forgotten with the mercurial mood of childhood. Want to see how fast I can climb down? Before she could answer, he was scrambling down the tree with the confidence of someone who'd done it 1,000 times. Amelia followed more carefully, her bleeding hands making the descent difficult. She was nearly to the ground when her foot slipped on a patch of moss. She fell the last 6 feet, landing hard on her back with an impact that drove all the air from her lungs. For a moment she just lay there, stunned and gasping. The sky above was impossibly blue, and she could hear Tobias calling her name, his voice high with worry. Then Rowan was there, kneeling beside her, his hands moving over her with professional efficiency, checking for broken bones, serious injuries, the kind of things you learned when you lived 6 miles from the nearest doctor. Don't move, he ordered. Can you breathe? She sucked in air, felt her lungs expand painfully. Yes. Anything broken? Sharp pains. No, I'm fine. Just had the wind knocked out of me. His hands stilled on her ribs, and suddenly Amelia was hyper-aware of his touch, the calloused fingers, the gentle pressure, the way he was looking at her with something that wasn't quite anger and wasn't quite concern. 4 years fell away, and for a moment they were back in the beginning, when he'd looked at her like she was precious, like he'd fight the whole world to keep her safe. "You could have broken your neck," he said, his voice rough. "But I didn't." "You could have—" He stopped himself, closing his eyes briefly. When he opened them again, the walls were back up. "Tobias, go inside and get the medicine box. Top shelf in the kitchen." The boy ran off, and Amelia tried to sit up. Rowan's hand on her shoulder stopped her. "I said don't move until I'm sure you're all right." "I'm fine, Rowan. I've survived worse falls than this." When did you—" He stopped, something dark crossing his face. "When they locked you up. You tried to escape." It wasn't a question. Amelia nodded, not trusting her voice. "How many times?" 6. No, 7. I lost count after a while." His jaw clenched. "And they caught you every time." "Until the last one. 3 days ago." She met his eyes, willing him to believe her. "I'm not lying, Rowan, about any of it. I fought to get back to you, to him. I never stopped fighting." He stared at her for a long moment, and she could see him wrestling with himself, the part that wanted to believe her fighting, the part that had learned to survive without hope. Finally he said, "Let me see your hands." She held them out, palms up. They were a mess, bloody, splintered, with blisters forming where the bark had rubbed raw. Rowan took them gently, his large hands cradling hers with a care that made her want to weep. "You should have said something. I wouldn't have made you stack wood if I'd known. I wanted to help. I needed to do something useful." She looked at their joined hands, marveling at the simple fact of his touch. "And maybe I needed to prove to you that I'm not fragile, that I can work, that I can be the kind of woman who belongs here. You don't belong here." But his voice lacked conviction, and he didn't let go of her hands. Tobias came running back with the medicine box, and Rowan released her to tend to her injuries. He worked in silence, cleaning the splinters out with tweezers, dabbing iodine on the worst cuts. It burned like hellfire, but Amelia didn't make a sound. She just watched him work, memorizing the furrow between his brows, the way he bit his lip when he concentrated, the gentleness in hands that could split wood like paper. "You're being stupid," he muttered, not looking up. "Stacking wood with bleeding hands, climbing trees in a borrowed dress. What were you trying to prove?" "That I'm not the woman who left you." The words came out before she could stop them. That woman was soft and scared and let other people make her choices. This woman climbs trees and stacks wood and fights for what she wants. "And what do you want, Amelia?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with possibility and pain. She knew what he wanted her to say, that she wanted to see Tobias and then leave, that she'd move on with her life somewhere far away, that she wouldn't disrupt the carefully ordered world he'd built. But she'd had enough of lies. "I want my son back," she said quietly. "And I want the man I love to forgive me, even if he can't love me anymore, even if that's gone forever. I just want him to understand that I never meant to hurt him." Rowan's hand stilled. For a long moment, he didn't move, didn't speak. Then he set down the iodine and looked at her with eyes that held 4 years of grief. "You want understanding? Fine. I'll tell you what I understand. I understand that you said you didn't love me. I understand that you married someone else. I understand that I had to raise our son alone while you were living whatever life you chose back east. Those are the facts I understand, Amelia. Everything else is just words." "Then let me show you." She grabbed his wrist again, desperate. "Let me prove it to you. Give me more than 1 day. Give me a week, a month, whatever you need to see that I'm telling the truth." "No." "Why not?" "Because—" He pulled away, standing up, putting distance between them again. "Because I can't go through losing you again. Do you understand that? When you left, it nearly destroyed me, and I barely held it together for Tobias's sake. I'm not strong enough to do that twice." "You won't have to lose me. I'm not leaving." "You will," he said with absolute certainty. "One way or another, you'll leave. Women like you always do. You'll get tired of the hard life, the isolation, the endless work. You'll remember what it's like to have nice things and soft beds and people who treat you like a lady, and you'll go back to it. Women like me?" Anger finally broke through her desperation. What do you know about women like me? You think I enjoyed being locked in a room for 3 years? You think I liked having my choices taken away, my body used, my will broken? You think that made me soft? I don't know what it made you. His voice rose to match hers. I don't know you anymore, Amelia. The woman I loved wouldn't have given up. She would have fought harder, found a way to send word, done something, anything, besides just disappearing. I did! She was screaming now, past caring that Tobias could probably hear, past caring about anything except making him understand. I fought every single day. I wrote letters they burned. I tried to escape and they beat me. I begged guards and servants and anyone who'd listen to help me. And you know what happened? My father paid them more than I could ever offer, and they stayed loyal to him. I had nothing, Rowan. No money, no allies, no hope, except the slim chance that maybe, someday, I'd find a way out. So don't you dare tell me I gave up. The silence that followed her outburst was deafening. Rowan stared at her, his face white, and Amelia realized she was shaking, with rage, with grief, with the accumulated weight of 4 years of suppressed emotion finally breaking free. Amelia, he started, but she cut him off. No, you wanted the truth? Here it is. They dragged me away in the middle of the night. My father had 6 men hold me down while a doctor gave me something that made me sleep. When I woke up, I was in a private asylum 3 states away. And the only people I saw for 3 years were nurses who wouldn't speak to me and doctors my father paid to declare me insane. Do you understand? They said I was crazy. They said I'd imagined you, imagined our son, imagined everything. And they kept me drugged just enough that sometimes I almost believed them. Rowan's face had gone from white to gray. Jesus Christ. The only reason they let me out was because my father needed me to marry Doyle Crane, some business arrangement, some merger that required a ward daughter as part of the bargain. So they cleaned me up, put me in a wedding dress, and told me if I didn't go through with it, they'd make sure I never saw daylight again. And I believed them. I believed them because by that point I was so broken I couldn't imagine any other outcome. But you ran. I ran because Doyle's estate had windows without bars, because the staff there hadn't been paid enough yet to be absolutely loyal, because I found a maid who had a son Tobias's age, and when I told her my story, she wept and gave me her life savings, $17, and helped me escape. And I've been running ever since, sleeping in barns and train cars and anywhere else I could hide. Because if they catch me, Rowan, if they find me and drag me back, I won't survive it this time. I'd rather die. She was crying now, openly, not bothering to wipe away the tears. So yes, I left you. Yes, I broke your heart, but I didn't do it because I didn't love you. I did it because I loved you too much to let my father kill you. He had a gun that day, pressed against his leg where you couldn't see it. And he told me if I didn't send you away, he'd put a bullet in your head and make it look like an accident. What was I supposed to do? Rowan sank down onto the porch steps, his head in his hands. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. Why didn't you tell me? Because you would have fought. You would have tried to protect me, and he would have killed you. And I couldn't be responsible for that. I couldn't live in a world where you were dead because of me. So instead you let me live in a world where I thought you'd stopped loving me. He looked up at her, and there were tears on his face too. Do you have any idea what that did to me? I would have rather died, Amelia. I swear to God, I would have rather taken a bullet than spend 4 years believing you'd chosen someone else. I'm sorry. The words were pitifully inadequate. I'm so sorry. I thought I was saving you, but all I did was hurt you in a different way. They sat in broken silence, the ruins of 4 years scattered between them like shattered glass. Somewhere inside, Tobias was probably wondering what was happening, why the adults were yelling, but neither of them moved. Neither of them knew how to begin picking up the pieces. Finally, Rowan spoke. I believe you. Amelia's head snapped up. What? I said I believe you, about your father, about the asylum, about running. I believe you. He scrubbed a hand over his face, exhausted. Doesn't change the past, doesn't undo the damage, but I believe you. It was the smallest opening, the tiniest crack in the walls he'd built, but Amelia seized it like a lifeline. Then let me stay. Just for a little while. Let me get to know Tobias. Let me prove to you that I'm not going to disappear again. And when your father finds you, when this Crane fellow comes looking for his runaway bride, what then? Then we deal with it, together, the way we should have 4 years ago. Rowan looked at her for a long time, and she could see him weighing options, calculating risks, trying to decide if the gamble was worth it. Finally, he said, 1 week. What? I'll give you 1 week. You can stay in town at the boarding house, and you can come here during the day. You can help with chores, spend time with Tobias, and we'll figure this out. But at the end of the week, we reassess. If it's not working, if you're causing more harm than good, you leave. Those are my terms. It wasn't everything she wanted. It wasn't even close, but it was more than she'd had that morning, more than she dared hope for when she stepped off that train. 1 week to prove herself. 1 week to show Rowan she was serious. 1 week to build something new from the wreckage of what they'd lost. I accept, she said. Thank you. He nodded wearily and stood. It's getting late. I'll hitch up the wagon and take you back to town. Rowan, don't. He held up a hand, stopping whatever she'd been about to say. Don't thank me and don't apologize again and don't. Just don't. I need time to process all of this. We both do. So let's just get through the rest of today, and tomorrow we'll start fresh. All right. He called for Tobias, and the boy emerged from the house looking worried. Are you fighting? He asked. I heard yelling. Just talking, Rowan said, ruffling his hair. Sometimes grown-ups talk loud. Miss Ward needs a ride back to town. Want to come? The ride back was quiet. Tobias chattered occasionally about things he saw, a hawk circling overhead, cattle in a distant field, but the adults barely spoke. Amelia sat in the wagon bed, giving them space, watching the ranch recede behind them, and praying this wasn't the last time she'd see it. When they reached Sweetwater Junction, Rowan helped her down with impersonal courtesy. I'll come by tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock. Be ready to work. I will be. Thank you, Rowan, for giving me this chance. He didn't answer, just clicked his tongue at the horse and drove away. Amelia watched until they disappeared, then turned to find Widow Henderson waiting on the porch, arms crossed. Well? The older woman asked. How did it go? Amelia thought about everything that had happened. The yelling, the crying, the confessions, the tiny sliver of hope Rowan had offered. I have a week, she said. He gave me a week to prove myself. Then you'd better make it count, girl. Because from the look on that man's face, he's still deciding whether to let you in or shut the door forever. Amelia climbed the stairs to her room, every muscle aching, her hands throbbing, her heart simultaneously full and breaking. 1 week. 7 days to convince Rowan she was worth the risk. 7 days to build a relationship with the son she'd lost. 7 days to prove she was strong enough, determined enough, worthy enough to be part of their lives. It wasn't much time, but it was all she had, and she wasn't going to waste a single moment of it. She woke before dawn the next morning, her body protesting every movement, but her mind sharp with purpose. The bandages on her hands had bled through during the night, and when she unwrapped them, the wounds looked angry and inflamed. She gritted her teeth and rewrapped them with strips torn from an old petticoat, then dressed in the borrowed work clothes Widow Henderson had left outside her door, trousers that had belonged to the widow's late husband, altered to fit, and a flannel shirt that smelled of lye soap and hope. By the time Rowan's wagon appeared on the dusty street at exactly 9 o'clock, Amelia was waiting on the porch with a bundle of food the widow had pressed into her hands. Man needs to eat, Widow Henderson had said gruffly, and that boy's growing like a weed. Take this. Consider it payment for the washing you'll be doing later. Rowan pulled the wagon to a stop, but didn't get down. Tobias waved enthusiastically from the seat beside him. Miss Ward, Papa says you're coming to help with chores today. That's right. Amelia climbed up before Rowan could decide to leave without her, settling into the wagon bed among empty feed sacks and the faint smell of hay. I brought lunch. Widow Henderson's cooking. Rowan's jaw tightened, but he accepted the bundle with a curt nod. We'll be working in the north pasture. Fences need mending before winter. Can you handle that? I can handle whatever you need me to handle. The ride out to the ranch was filled with Tobias's chatter. He told her about a mouse he'd found in the barn, about how Papa had promised to teach him to ride a real horse soon, not just the wooden one, about a book the school teacher had given him with pictures of faraway places. Amelia listened to every word, storing them away like precious gems, while Rowan drove in silence. When they reached the ranch, Rowan handed her a pair of work gloves. "Those hands won't last 5 minutes without these. And before you argue, they were my old pair. They'll be too big, but they're better than nothing." The gloves were indeed too large, worn soft from years of use, and they smelled like him, leather and wood smoke and something indefinably Rowan. Amelia pulled them on and followed him out to where the fence line cut across the golden prairie. The work was backbreaking. Posts had rotted and needed replacing. Wire had come loose and needed restringing. The autumn sun beat down mercilessly, and by mid-morning Amelia's back was screaming and her bandaged hands were bleeding again inside the gloves. But she didn't complain. She held posts steady while Rowan hammered them into the hard ground. She pulled wire taut while he secured it. She did everything he asked without question, without rest, because this week was all she had and she'd be damned if she'd waste it proving she couldn't handle the life he'd built. Tobias played nearby, building elaborate structures from old fence posts and singing to himself in the unselfconscious way of small children. Every so often, he'd run over to show them something, a grasshopper, a pretty rock, a bird's feather, and Amelia would admire it with genuine enthusiasm while Rowan watched with an expression she couldn't read. "You're bleeding through the gloves," he said finally, when they stopped to drink from the water jug he'd brought. "Take a break." "I'm fine." "Amelia," his voice held warning. "Take a break." She set down the wire stretcher and sank onto the grass, suddenly aware of how exhausted she was. Rowan crouched beside her and pulled off the gloves, revealing bandages soaked red. His face darkened. "This is exactly what I was afraid of. You're going to hurt yourself trying to prove something." "I'm proving I can do this," she said stubbornly. "I'm proving I belong here." "You don't belong here by destroying yourself." He pulled medical supplies from his saddlebag. He must have brought them anticipating this, and began unwrapping the ruined bandages. "You belong here by being honest about your limits, by asking for help when you need it, by not being so goddamn stubborn that you'd rather bleed than admit you're human." "I can't afford to be human." The words came out harsh. "I have 1 week, Rowan. 1 week to show you I'm not the fragile girl who left. 1 week to prove I can handle ranch life. If I stop every time something hurts, I'll fail. And if you push so hard you collapse, you'll fail anyway." He cleaned her hands with water and a rag, his touch gentle despite his frustration. "This isn't a test you can pass by suffering more than everyone else. Life isn't like that, isn't it?" She met his eyes. "You suffered alone for 4 years. You worked yourself to exhaustion raising Tobias without help. Don't tell me that suffering doesn't prove something." "It proved I could survive. That's all. It didn't make me better or stronger or more worthy. It just made me—" He trailed off, searching for words. "It just made me tired." The admission hung between them, raw and unexpected. Amelia looked at him, really looked, and saw what she'd been too caught up in her own grief to notice yesterday, the lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before. The gray already threading through his dark hair, the weight he carried in his shoulders, the burden of being everything to everyone with no one to lean on. "I could help with that," she said softly. "The tired part. If you'd let me. For a week. And then what? I don't know." Honesty seemed to be working better than false promises. "I don't know what happens after the week, but I know I'm here now, and I know I want to help. That has to count for something." He finished bandaging her hands in silence, then stood and offered her his hand. She took it, let him pull her to her feet. For a moment they stood close enough that she could feel his warmth, could see the gold flecks in his gray eyes, could remember what it felt like when touching him had been natural instead of fraught with 4 years of betrayal and grief. "Papa!" Tobias's shout broke the moment. "There's a rider coming!" They both turned to see dust rising on the eastern road. A single horseman, moving fast. Rowan's entire body went tense, his hand instinctively moving toward where a gun would have been if he'd been wearing one. "Take Tobias inside," he said quietly. "Lock the door. Don't come out until I say." "Rowan, what—" "Now, Amelia." The tone in his voice sent ice down her spine. She ran to Tobias, scooped him up despite his protests, and carried him toward the house. "But I want to see who it is," he complained. "We're going to let Papa handle the visitor," she said, forcing calm into her voice. "Sometimes grown-ups need to have private conversations." She got him inside and locked the door as instructed, then moved to the window where she could see without being easily seen. The writer was closer now, and she could make out details. A young man, maybe 20, with the bearing of someone who'd been riding hard for days. He wore dusty traveling clothes and carried a leather satchel across his shoulders. Rowan met him halfway between the house and the road, standing with his arms crossed and his stance wide. She couldn't hear what they were saying, but she could see the tension in every line of Rowan's body. The young man handed him an envelope. Rowan stared at it for a long moment before breaking the seal and reading. Even from a distance, Amelia could see the color drain from his face. Whatever was in that letter, it wasn't good news. The young man left as quickly as he'd come, and Rowan stood alone in the yard, the letter clutched in his hand, staring at nothing. After what felt like an eternity, he walked slowly back to the house. Amelia unlocked the door before he could knock. "Who was that?" she asked, though part of her already felt the cold dread settling in her stomach. Rowan looked at her with eyes that held something between fury and resignation. "We need to talk. Tobias, go play in your room for a while." "But, now, son." The boy went, sensing this was not a time to argue. The moment his door closed, Rowan thrust the letter at Amelia. "This came from Boston, from a postal service that forwards urgent messages. It's 4 years old, postmarked 3 months after you left." Amelia's hands shook as she unfolded the worn paper. The handwriting was barely legible, written in obvious haste, but she recognized it immediately as her own. "My dearest Rowan, if you are reading this, then by some miracle, my words have finally reached you. They have locked me away in a private facility outside Philadelphia. Father claims I am unstable, that I need treatment, but this is a lie. I am a prisoner, and our son is my ransom for good behavior. They tell me if I comply, I may see him again someday. If I resist, they will make sure I never know if he lives or dies. I have tried everything: bribery, pleading, escape attempts that leave me bruised and bleeding. Nothing works. They are too well paid, too loyal to my father's money. I do not know if this letter will ever reach you. I have entrusted it to a nurse who seems sympathetic, but she may simply take the coin I gave her and burn it anyway. But I had to try. I had to believe that somewhere, somehow, the truth might find you. I never stopped loving you. I never will. Every breath I take is an act of faith that someday I will hold our son again, that someday you will know I didn't choose this. Please don't hate me. Please tell Tobias, when he's old enough to understand, that his mother fought for him, that she never stopped fighting. All my love, all my soul, always yours. Amelia." The paper fell from her nerveless fingers. "You didn't get this. You never got this." "It arrived this morning. The Postal Service had been holding it at their Philadelphia office all this time, some bureaucratic mix-up about forwarding addresses. When they finally processed it, they realized how old it was and sent a special courier." His voice was hollow, scraped raw. 4 years, Amelia. This has been sitting in an office for 4 goddamned years." She felt the room spinning. "If you'd gotten this when I sent it, I would have come for you." The certainty in his voice was absolute. "I would have ridden to Philadelphia, torn that place apart with my bare hands if I had to. I would have moved heaven and earth to bring you home. But I wasn't there anymore. By the time this would have reached you, they'd already moved me 3 more times. You never would have found me. I would have tried." He sank into a chair, the letter crumpled in his fist. "Jesus Christ, I would have tried." The weight of it crashed over both of them. All the might-have-beens, all the lost time, all the suffering that could have been avoided if one letter had arrived when it should have. 4 years of grief and anger and loneliness, all because of bureaucratic incompetence. "I'm sorry," Amelia whispered, though she didn't know what she was apologizing for anymore. For writing the letter, for trusting it would arrive, for everything they'd both lost. "Stop apologizing." Rowan's voice was rough. "Just stop. This isn't your fault. None of this is your fault, and I've been—" He broke off, pressing the heels of his hands against his eyes. "I've been punishing you for something you didn't do, for leaving when you never left, For giving up when you were fighting the whole time. God, Amelia, I'm the one who's sorry. She moved toward him, cautious, not sure if he wanted comfort or space. But when she knelt in front of his chair, when she gently pulled his hands away from his face, he didn't resist. He looked at her with eyes full of 4 years of accumulated pain, and she saw him the way she'd always seen him. Not as the hard, bitter man he'd become, but as the person underneath, the one who'd loved her enough to grieve himself hollow when he thought she'd betrayed him. "We can't get those years back," she said softly. "But we're here now, both of us, and maybe that's enough to start building something new." "I don't know how." The confession seemed to cost him. "I don't know how to trust again. How to believe this is real and not just another dream I'll wake up from." "Then don't trust it yet. Just let it be. Let me be here. Let me help. And we'll figure out the rest as we go." He studied her face for a long moment, and she let him look, let him search for whatever he needed to find. Finally, he nodded. "The week still stands. But after this, after knowing you really did try to reach me, I need you to understand something. If your father shows up here, if this Crane bastard comes looking for you, I'm not letting them take you. I don't care what legal papers they have, what laws they cite. You're under my protection now. Do you understand?" "Rowan, you can't." "I can, and I will." His voice hardened with determination. "I failed you once by not fighting hard enough, by letting you push me away when I should have held on tighter. I won't make that mistake again." Before she could respond, Tobias's door creaked open. The boy peered out cautiously. "Are you done with grown-up talk? I'm hungry." The moment broke. Rowan stood, scrubbing a hand over his face, visibly pulling himself together. "Yeah, son, we're done. Let's get some lunch." They ate the food Widow Henderson had sent, sitting at the small kitchen table with forced normalcy. Tobias chattered about wanting to catch the mouse in the barn and train it to do tricks, oblivious to the emotional earthquake that had just reshaped his father's world. Amelia and Rowan exchanged glances over his head, an entire conversation happening in silence. What do we tell him? When? How? Not yet. They both knew it without speaking. He was too young, and things were too uncertain. But the foundation had shifted. The possibility of something more than just a week had opened up, fragile and tentative, but there. After lunch, they returned to the fence line. The work went differently now. Rowan showed her easier ways to do things, adjusted his expectations when he saw she was struggling, actually talked to her instead of working in silent judgment. They fell into a rhythm, passing tools back and forth, moving around each other with the unconscious coordination of people who'd once known each other's bodies as well as their own. "Tell me about the last 4 years," Amelia said as they worked. "Tell me how you ended up here. This ranch, this life." Rowan was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then slowly, he began to talk. "After you left, after I thought you left, I couldn't stay in Independence. Too many memories. Every street corner, every shop, every goddamn tree reminded me of you. And I had a baby who needed care, needed stability, needed a father who wasn't falling apart at the seams." He paused to hammer a post, each strike punctuating his words. "I sold everything I owned, bought a wagon and supplies, and headed west. Figured I'd go far enough that I could start over where no one knew me, where no one would look at me with pity. I got as far as Sweetwater before Tobias got sick, really sick. Fever that wouldn't break, couldn't keep anything down. The local doctor said he probably wouldn't make it." Amelia's breath caught. But he did. Barely. Doc Patterson, that's Mrs. Patterson's late husband, he sat up with us for 3 days straight. Wouldn't leave, wouldn't give up. When Tobias finally turned the corner, Doc said I owed him nothing but to make a good life for that boy. Said Sweetwater could use a good man willing to work hard. He moved to the next post, his movements mechanical, automatic. So I stayed. Bought this land with the last of my money. Built the house with timber I cut myself. Learned ranching from the neighbors who took pity on the young widower with a baby. And every single day, I woke up and chose to keep going. For him. Only for him. "You built a good life," Amelia said quietly. "You should be proud." "Should I?" He laughed without humor. "I built it on anger and grief and the belief that you'd abandoned us. That's not something to be proud of. That's just survival. Survival is enough. Sometimes it has to be. They worked until the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the prairie in shades of amber and gold. The fence line was finished, sturdy and straight, a testament to hard work and cooperation. Rowan stepped back to survey their handiwork, and something in his expression softened. "You did good today," he said. "Really good. I half expected you to quit by noon. I told you I'm not that woman anymore." "Yeah." He looked at her, really looked at her, and she saw recognition in his eyes. Not of who she'd been, but of who she was becoming. "Yeah, I'm starting to see that." They rode back to town in comfortable silence, Tobias asleep between them, his head pillowed on Amelia's lap. She stroked his hair gently, marveling at the simple miracle of being allowed to touch him, to feel his warmth, to be part of his world even in this small way. At the boarding house, Rowan helped her down from the wagon. His hands lingered on her waist a moment longer than necessary, and when she looked up at him, she saw something in his face that hadn't been there before. Not forgiveness, not yet, but the possibility of it, the willingness to try. "Same time tomorrow?" she asked. "Same time. We're hauling hay from the north field. Dress warm." "I will." She watched him drive away, then climbed the stairs to her room, where Widow Henderson had left hot water and clean bandages. As she tended to her wounded hands, she thought about the letter that had finally arrived 4 years too late, about all the ways fate and bureaucracy and simple bad luck had conspired to keep them apart. But they were together now. Maybe not in the way they'd once been, maybe not with the easy certainty of young love, but together nonetheless. And if 4 years had taught her anything, it was that being together at all was a gift too precious to waste. The next 3 days fell into a pattern. Rowan would arrive at 9, and they'd work until sunset with a break for lunch. The work was varied and endless, hauling hay, mucking stalls, mending tack, harvesting the kitchen garden before the first frost. Amelia threw herself into every task with determination that bordered on obsession, ignoring blisters and bruises and exhaustion. And slowly, degree by painful degree, the walls between them began to crumble. It started with small things. Rowan began packing an extra canteen of water without being asked, anticipating when she'd need it. She learned to read his moods, to know when he needed silence and when he needed distraction. They developed a shorthand, a way of working together that required fewer words and more trust. Tobias was the bridge between them. When things got too tense or too awkward, he'd appear with some childish crisis that needed solving, some question that needed answering, some adventure that required adult supervision. And in caring for him together, Amelia and Rowan found neutral ground. On the 4th day, it rained. Not the gentle rain of spring, but the cold, driving rain of late autumn that promised winter was coming. Amelia arrived at the ranch soaked despite the oilskin coat Widow Henderson had loaned her, her teeth chattering. Rowan took one look at her and said, "You're staying inside today. No arguments. But the work will wait. You're no good to anyone if you catch pneumonia." He ushered her into the house, into the warmth of the kitchen where a fire blazed in the stove. "Sit. I'll make coffee." She sat, dripping onto the floor, and watched him move around the kitchen with easy familiarity. He made coffee strong enough to strip paint, pressed a cup into her frozen hands, and wrapped a blanket around her shoulders. "Thank you," she managed through chattering teeth. "Can't have you dying on me. Would complicate things." But his tone was gentle, almost teasing, and she realized with a start that they were actually talking like normal people instead of two survivors of a shared disaster. Tobias was delighted to have her inside on a rainy day. He brought out all his treasures, the wooden horse, a collection of interesting rocks, a book of fairy tales that was falling apart from repeated reading. "Will you read to me?" he asked, shoving the book into her lap. "Papa reads good, but he always falls asleep during the boring parts." "I do not," Rowan protested. "You fell asleep during The Miller's Daughter twice." "That's because The Miller's Daughter is boring." Amelia found herself laughing, actually laughing as she opened the book. "What story do you want to hear?" "The one about the knight and the dragon." She read while the rain hammered against the windows and the fire crackled in the stove. Tobias sat pressed against her side, following along even though he couldn't read yet, occasionally interrupting with questions or observations. Rowan sat across from them, ostensibly mending a bridle, but she caught him watching them with an expression that made her heart ache. This was what they'd lost, this simple domestic peace. The three of them together in a warm kitchen while the world raged outside. A family. When the story ended, Tobias demanded another, then another. By the time he finally tired of stories, the rain had lessened to a steady drizzle, and Amelia's clothes had dried. She felt warm all the way through, not just from the fire, but from something deeper, something that had been frozen for 4 years and was finally beginning to thaw. "I should start lunch," Rowan said, standing and stretching. "Nothing fancy, probably just beans and cornbread. I can help." "You don't have to." "I want to." She met his eyes. "Please, let me help." They worked together in the small kitchen, their movements careful at first, then gradually more natural. Amelia chopped onions while Rowan tended the beans. She mixed cornbread batter while he set the table. It was domestic and ordinary and absolutely extraordinary. "This is nice," Tobias observed, sitting at the table and swinging his legs. "It's like having a mama here." The words dropped into the kitchen like stones into still water. Rowan froze, his hand suspended over the pot of beans. Amelia's heart stopped. They both turned to look at the boy, who seemed completely unaware that he'd said anything momentous. "What makes you say that, son?" Rowan's voice was carefully neutral. Tobias shrugged. "Just is. Miss Ward helps cook and read stories and takes care of things. That's what mamas do, right? That's what you said my mama did before she had to go away." Amelia had to turn away, pretending to check the cornbread in the oven so the boy wouldn't see the tears threatening to spill over. This child, her child, had just compared her to the mother he'd never known, had no idea he was looking at the very person he was describing. "Yeah," Rowan said softly. "That's what mamas do." The meal was quiet after that, everyone lost in their own thoughts. But when Amelia went to leave, Rowan insisted on driving her back despite the rain. Tobias hugged her goodbye. It was the first time he'd initiated physical contact, and it almost undid her completely. "Will you come back tomorrow?" he asked, his small arms tight around her waist. "If your papa says it's all right." "Papa always says it's all right now. I think he likes having you here too." In the wagon, with Tobias between them and the rain creating a curtain of privacy, Rowan finally spoke. "He's getting attached. Is that a bad thing?" "I don't know." "What happens at the end of the week, Amelia? What happens when you have to leave?" "Who says I have to leave?" He pulled the wagon to a stop, right there in the middle of the muddy road. "You can't stay in Sweetwater indefinitely. You're still legally married to Crane. Your father is probably looking for you. Sooner or later, the past is going to catch up, and when it does, then we'll deal with it." She turned to face him, ignoring the rain that was starting to soak through her coat again. "Together, like we should have done 4 years ago. I'm not running anymore, Rowan. I'm done running. Whatever comes, I'm staying here and facing it." "That's easy to say when there's no one knocking at the door." "Then let them knock." Her voice rose with passion. "Let them come. I'll tell them the same thing I'm telling you. I'm not going back. I don't care about the marriage certificate I signed under duress. I don't care about my father's threats. I don't care about propriety or scandal or what anyone thinks. I care about my son, and I care about—" She stopped herself, but it was too late. The words hung in the air between them, unspoken but understood. "About what?" His voice was rough, challenging. "Say it." "About you." The admission came out barely above a whisper. "I never stopped caring about you, even when I thought I'd never see you again, even when I was so broken I could barely remember my own name. I never stopped loving you." Rowan stared at her, and she could see him warring with himself, the part that wanted to believe her fighting the part that was still afraid of being hurt again. Rain drummed on the wagon roof. Tobias dozed between them, oblivious. And for a moment the whole world narrowed to just the two of them and the impossible choice he had to make. "One more day, he finally said. "We'll see how you feel after one more day." It wasn't the declaration she'd hoped for, but it wasn't a rejection either. It was another day, another chance, another opportunity to prove herself. She'd take it. The 5th day dawned clear and cold, the storm having blown itself out overnight. Amelia woke with a sense of anticipation she couldn't name. a feeling that something was about to shift. She dressed carefully, braided her hair, and was waiting on the porch when Rowan's wagon appeared. But something was wrong. She could see it in the rigid set of his shoulders, in the way he barely looked at her as she climbed aboard. Tobias was quiet too, subdued in a way that was unlike him. "What's wrong?" she asked. "Got word this morning." Rowan's voice was tight. "There's a fever going around. Doc's office is overwhelmed. They're asking for anyone who can help to come to town." "Then we should go." "No." The word was sharp, final. "You're staying at the ranch with Tobias. I'm going to town to help." "Rowan, I can help too." "Help. I said no!" He pulled the wagon to a halt, turning to face her with eyes full of barely controlled fear. "I can't risk both of you. If this fever spreads, if it's as bad as they're saying, I need to know you're safe. That he's safe." She understood then. This wasn't about her competence or his trust. This was about the primal terror of a man who'd already lost almost everything, who couldn't bear the thought of losing anything more. "All right," she said gently. "We'll stay at the ranch, but Rowan, you need to be careful too. Come back to us." The words slipped out unbidden. Us, not him. Come back to us. And from the way Rowan's expression flickered, he'd caught it too. "I will," he promised. "Just take care of him. Please, if something happens, if he shows any signs of fever, I know what to do. Go, they need you." He dropped them at the ranch and left immediately, the wagon kicking up dust as he pushed the horse into a fast trot. Amelia stood in the yard with Tobias's hand in hers, watching until the wagon disappeared, and felt a cold dread settle in her stomach. This was exactly what she'd feared. The universe giving them a chance at happiness, and then immediately testing whether they could survive it. She pushed the feeling aside and focused on Tobias. "All right, sweetheart. Your papa's going to be gone for a while. What should we do today?" They spent the morning doing chores, feeding chickens, collecting eggs, tidying the house. Tobias helped with everything, chattering to fill the silence his father's absence had created. But by afternoon, he'd grown quiet, and when Amelia felt his forehead, it was warm. "I don't feel good," he admitted, his small face pinched with discomfort. Every instinct in her body screamed alarm, but she forced herself to stay calm. "Okay, let's get you into bed and I'll make you some tea with honey, just like your papa does when you're sick, right?" "Right." But his voice was small, scared. She got him settled, made the tea, sat beside his bed with a cool cloth for his forehead. The fever climbed steadily as the afternoon wore on, and by evening he was burning up, his small body shaking with chills despite the blankets she'd piled on him. "Mama," he whimpered, half delirious. "I want Mama." The word shattered her. "I'm here, baby. I'm right here." "No, my Mama, the one in heaven. Papa says she watches over me from heaven." Amelia bit her lip hard enough to taste blood. This wasn't the time for truth. This wasn't the moment to tell him she was that Mama, that she'd never gone to heaven, that she'd been in hell but was here now. So instead she held his hand and sang the lullabies she'd once sung when he was a baby, praying he'd recognize them somewhere in his fevered dreams. The night was endless. The fever spiked higher, and Tobias began to thrash, crying out for his father, for his mama, for anyone to make it stop. Amelia did everything she could remember: cool cloths, lukewarm baths, honey water to keep him hydrated. But the fever wouldn't break, and as the hours crept toward dawn, she felt panic clawing at her throat. She couldn't lose him, not now, not when she'd just found him again, not when they were so close to being a family. "Please," she whispered into the darkness, not sure if she was praying or pleading or both. "Please don't take him from me again. I'll do anything. I'll leave if that's what it takes. I'll disappear forever. Just please, please let him live." Tobias's fever peaked just before dawn, his body so hot she could feel the heat radiating off him. And then, as the first rays of sunlight touched the horizon, as Amelia sat beside his bed with tears streaming down her face and her hand gripping his tiny one, the fever broke. The change was almost instant. His body stopped shaking, his breathing eased, his skin, which had been burning just moments before, began to cool. She felt his forehead with trembling fingers and nearly sobbed with relief. He was going to be okay. Her son was going to be okay. She collapsed beside the bed, her forehead resting against the mattress, and let herself cry. Great heaving sobs of relief and exhaustion and accumulated terror. She was still there, still crying, when she heard the front door open and Rowan's boots on the floor. "Amelia?" She couldn't answer, couldn't form words, just lifted her head enough for him to see her face, to see Tobias sleeping peacefully, to understand what had happened. Rowan was across the room in 3 strides, checking his son with practiced hands, feeling his forehead, his pulse, his breathing. When he was satisfied, when he'd confirmed what Amelia already knew, he sank to the floor beside her. "How long?" His voice was wrecked. "Since yesterday afternoon. The fever broke about an hour ago." "You stayed with him all night." "Where else would I be?" He looked at her then, really looked at her, and she saw something in his face that made her breath catch. Not the careful distance he'd been maintaining, not the protective walls he'd built, just raw, honest emotion. "Thank you," he said, "for keeping him safe, for being here when I couldn't. I'll always be here." The promise came from somewhere deep inside her. "As long as you'll let me. I'll always be here." Rowan reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted to. When she didn't, when she stayed perfectly still, barely daring to breathe, he cupped her face in his calloused palm. His thumb brushed across her cheekbone, wiping away tears. "I believe you," he whispered. "Finally, completely, I believe you." And then he kissed her. It wasn't the passionate, desperate kiss of their youth. It was something gentler, something harder won. It was forgiveness and hope and the tentative beginning of healing. When they pulled apart, Tobias was awake, watching them with fever-bright eyes. "Papa," he said sleepily. "Are you kissing Miss Ward?" Rowan laughed, the sound rusty but genuine. "Yeah, son, I am." "Good. I like her. Can she stay forever?" Rowan looked at Amelia, and in his eyes she saw the answer to the question that had been hanging over them since she arrived. The week was over, but they weren't. "Yeah," he said. "I think she can." The moment stretched between them like spun gold, fragile and precious, until Tobias broke it with a yawn that turned into a complaint. "Papa, I'm hungry." Rowan laughed again, the sound coming easier this time, and ruffled his son's hair. "Of course you are. That means you're getting better. Let's get some food in you." Amelia started to stand, her legs cramping from hours of sitting, but Rowan stopped her with a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You need rest too. You look like you're about to fall over." "I'm fine." "You're not. When's the last time you slept?" She tried to remember and couldn't. The hours had blurred together in a haze of worry and prayer. "I don't know. Yesterday sometime." "Then you're sleeping now. Take my bed. I'll handle breakfast and keep an eye on Tobias." "Rowan, I can't take your... You can and you will. Don't make me carry you in there." The threat was softened by the warmth in his eyes, by the hint of a smile playing at his lips. She was too exhausted to argue. She let him guide her to his room, a small space barely big enough for the bed and a chest of drawers, but clean and spare and smelling of him. The sheets were rough-woven but had been washed recently. She sank onto the mattress and was asleep before he'd even closed the door. When she woke, the sun was high and streaming through the small window, and she could hear voices in the kitchen, Rowan's deep rumble and Tobias's higher chatter, and a third voice she didn't recognize. She sat up too quickly, her head swimming, and tried to orient herself. How long had she been asleep? Hours, clearly. And who was here? She stumbled out of the bedroom, still wearing yesterday's clothes, her hair falling loose from its braid, and found Rowan at the stove making stew while Tobias sat at the table with an older woman Amelia recognized as Mrs. Patterson from the boarding house. "Well, there she is," Mrs. Patterson said warmly. "The hero of the hour. Rowan's been telling me how you stayed up all night with the boy." "I just did what anyone would do." Amelia felt heat rise in her cheeks, uncomfortable with the praise. "Not anyone. Most folks would have panicked and made things worse, but you kept your head and brought him through." Mrs. Patterson stood and moved toward the door. "I just came by to check on you all, make sure you didn't need anything, but I can see you're well taken care of." There was something knowing in the way she said it, a glint in her eye that suggested she'd seen or heard something before Amelia had emerged. The kiss, probably. Or maybe just the way Rowan was looking at Amelia now, like she was something precious he'd thought lost forever and couldn't quite believe he'd found again. After Mrs. Patterson left, they ate together in comfortable silence. Tobias was still weak, but clearly on the mend, complaining about being tired and wanting to play simultaneously, the universal sign of a child recovering from illness. Rowan kept glancing at Amelia as if checking she was real, and she found herself doing the same to him. The kiss had changed something, broken through the last of the walls they'd both been hiding behind. But neither of them seemed to know what to do about it, how to navigate this new territory when they were so different from the people they'd been 4 years ago. It was Tobias who finally broke the awkwardness, asking the question neither adult had dared voice. "Is Miss Ward going to live here now?" Rowan's spoon paused halfway to his mouth. Amelia froze, her coffee cup suspended in mid-air. They looked at each other across the table, an entire conversation happening in silence. "I don't know, son," Rowan said carefully. "That's something Miss Ward and I need to talk about." "Why?" "She already does all the things mamas do. She cooks and reads stories and took care of me when I was sick. And you kissed her, which means you like her. So why can't she just stay?" The childish logic was unassailable and terrifying in its simplicity. Amelia set down her coffee cup with shaking hands. "It's more complicated than that, sweetheart." "Why?" "Because—" She looked helplessly at Rowan. "How did you explain to a 4-year-old about forced marriages and legal documents and fathers who treated their daughters as property? How did you make him understand that sometimes wanting something wasn't enough?" "Because grown-ups make things complicated," Rowan said, his eyes still on Amelia. "But maybe we don't have to. Maybe sometimes the simple answer is the right one." "Does that mean yes?" Tobias bounced in his chair despite his lingering weakness. "Does that mean she's staying?" "That depends on whether she wants to stay." Rowan's voice was steady, but Amelia could hear the uncertainty underneath, the fear that she might say no. "Whether she's willing to take on a ready-made family and a hard life on a ranch that barely turns a profit, whether she can handle being part of a community that's going to have opinions about a woman living here without being married to me." The word hung in the air between them. Married. He hadn't said it directly, but the implication was clear. This wasn't just about staying, this was about making it permanent, legal, real. "I want to stay," Amelia said, her voice stronger than she felt. "I want to be here with both of you, but Rowan, I'm still legally married to Doyle Crane, and my father— Your father doesn't get a say anymore." The steel in Rowan's voice made it clear this wasn't negotiable. "And as for Crane, we'll deal with that. There are lawyers in Cheyenne. We'll find a way to annul the marriage. It was performed under duress. You have witnesses to that." "Do I?" "The maid who helped me escape, she's gone now, probably fired or paid off. Everyone at that wedding was loyal to my father or to Crane. Who's going to testify that I was forced?" "I will." The voice came from the doorway, and they all turned to see Bill Crandall standing there, hat in hand. "Sorry for intruding. Door was open and I heard voices. But I can testify that you arrived in this town wearing a wedding dress, clearly distressed, with signs of physical injury. That's got to count for something." "Bill?" Rowan stood. "What are you doing here?" "Bringing news. Thought you should hear it sooner rather than later." The old man's face was grave. "There's strangers in town. 3 men asking questions about a woman matching Amelia's description. They've been showing a photograph around, talking to anyone who'll listen, saying she's mentally unstable, that she ran away from a hospital, that her family's desperate to find her." The coffee Amelia had just drunk turned to acid in her stomach. "It's them. It has to be. My father wouldn't come himself, too much attention, but he'd send people." "They're at the hotel now," Bill continued, making a show of being respectable, concerned relatives. "But I've seen men like that before. They're hired muscle dressed up in nice coats. The kind of men who'll do whatever they're paid to do and not lose sleep over it." Rowan's face had gone hard, all the softness from moments before replaced by something cold and dangerous. "How long until they find out she's been here?" "Already have, I expect. Widow Henderson's loyal, but there's others in town who'll talk for a few coins. I'd say you have until nightfall, maybe. Then they'll come. Then we need to move now." Rowan was already in motion, pulling supplies from shelves, his mind clearly working through options. "Bill, can you get word to Sheriff Morrison? Tell him what's happening, that I'm requesting his presence here as a witness. Morrison's out of town for another 2 days. Went to Laramie for some trial. Damn. Rowan ran a hand through his hair, thinking. All right, plan B. Amelia, pack whatever you need. We're riding to Cheyenne today. We can be there by tomorrow morning if we push hard. File for an annulment, maybe find a judge who will issue a protective order. I'm not running again. Amelia's voice cut through his planning. I told you I'm done running. This isn't running, it's being smart. It's running. She stood, her hands flat on the table. It's exactly what I've been doing for 4 years, and it never works. They'll just follow us to Cheyenne. They'll follow us anywhere. The only way this ends is if I face them here, on ground I choose, with people I trust beside me. You can't face them alone. You don't know what they'll do. I won't be alone. I'll have you. She moved around the table to stand in front of him, forcing him to meet her eyes. And the people of this town, most of whom have been surprisingly kind to a stranger wearing a torn wedding dress. And the truth, which is stronger than any lies my father can buy. The truth didn't help you 4 years ago. 4 years ago, I was alone and scared and still believed I had to obey my father. I'm none of those things now. She reached up to cup his face, the gesture intimate and claiming. I found my way back to you and to our son. I survived things that should have broken me. I'm not the woman they took. I'm stronger now, and I'm not going to let them win. Rowan stared at her, and she could see him wrestling with the urge to throw her over his shoulder and ride out anyway, to hell with her wishes. But finally, he nodded. On one condition. When they come, you let me do the talking. You stay behind me, you keep Tobias safe, and if things go bad, you run. You take my son and you run and you don't look back. Agreed? Agreed. Bill cleared his throat. For what it's worth, I think she's right. Running just delays the inevitable. Better to face it head on, especially with witnesses. And I can round up some of the men in town, folks who've gotten to know her this week. Character witnesses, so to speak. Do it, Rowan said. And Bill, thank you. For everything. Don't thank me yet. Thank me when this is over and everyone's still standing. After Bill left, they prepared. Rowan checked his rifle, loading it with the grim efficiency of someone who hoped he wouldn't need it, but would be ready if he did. Amelia took Tobias into his room and explained, as gently as she could, that some bad men might come to the ranch, but Papa would keep them safe. Are they coming to hurt you? Tobias asked, his small face serious beyond his years. They're coming to take me away, to make me go back to a place I don't want to be. Then you should stay here. This is your home now. He said it with such absolute certainty that Amelia had to turn away to hide her tears. You're my mama. I know I'm not supposed to know that, but I do. I heard you singing those songs when I was sick, and Papa used to hum them to me when I was little. He said they were the songs my mama sang, so you're her. You're my mama. Amelia sank to her knees in front of him, no longer caring about Rowan's rules, no longer able to maintain the pretense. Yes, baby, I'm your mama, and I'm so sorry I couldn't be here before. But I'm here now, and I'm not leaving, not ever again, I promise you. Even if the bad men come? Even then. They might try to take me, but I'm going to fight. And Papa's going to fight. And we're going to win because we're a family, and families don't give up on each other. He threw his arms around her neck, holding tight, and whispered, I'm glad you came back. She held him, breathing in the scent of him, child sweat, and soap, and something indefinably Tobias, and felt 4 years of grief begin to transform into something else. Not forgiveness of what had been done to them, but acceptance of what was. They were here now. They were together, and she would burn the whole world down before she let anyone separate them again. Rowan appeared in the doorway. They're coming. Bill just rode up. Says the men are about a mile out, 3 of them on horseback. Good. Amelia stood, settled Tobias on his bed with his wooden horse. Baby, I need you to stay in here no matter what you hear. Can you do that for me? I want to help. You can help by staying safe. That's the most important job. She kissed his forehead, lingering a moment, then straightened. Rowan, let's go meet them. They walked out to the yard together, and Amelia was touched to see that Bill hadn't come alone. About a dozen men from town were there. Ranch hands, shop owners, even the old postman who delivered Rowan's letter. They stood in a loose semicircle, not threatening, but clearly there as witnesses and support. Figured you could use some friendly faces, Bill said. Whatever happens, we'll make sure the truth gets told. The three strangers appeared at the gate moments later. They rode expensive horses and wore clothes that marked them as city men, trying to look like they belonged in the country. The leader was a tall man with cold eyes and a mouth that looked like it rarely smiled. He stopped at the gate and tipped his hat in a mockery of politeness. "Good afternoon. We're looking for Amelia Ward. Been told she might be here." "What's your business with her?" Rowan's voice was level, but Amelia could see the tension in his shoulders, could see his hand resting casually near where his rifle leaned against the porch railing. Her family's concerned. She left a hospital facility without permission, and they're worried about her well-being. We're just here to escort her safely home. "I don't need an escort." Amelia stepped forward, and Rowan's hand shot out to keep her behind him, but she gently pushed it aside. "And I'm not going back." The man's eyes found her, and his expression shifted into something that was probably meant to look sympathetic, but came across as condescending. "Now, Mrs. Crane, I understand you're confused. The doctors said you might resist help, but your husband is very worried about you. He just wants you home safe, where you can get the treatment you need." "I don't need treatment. I need to be left alone. The marriage to Doyle Crane was performed under duress. I was forced to sign documents while being physically restrained. That makes it invalid. That's not what the marriage certificate says, and you are still his legal wife, which means he has every right to take you home." "She's not going anywhere," Rowan's voice cut through the air like a blade. "You want to take her? You go through me first." The man's eyes flicked to the rifle, to the assembled townspeople, calculating odds. "Sir, I don't want any trouble, but I have legal documents giving me the authority to retrieve Mrs. Crane. If you interfere, you'll be breaking the law." "Then I guess I'm breaking the law." Rowan moved to stand fully in front of Amelia, a wall of muscle and determination. "Because she's not leaving this ranch unless she wants to." "And I don't want to." Amelia's voice rang out clear and strong. "I'm staying here with my son and the man I love. So you can take your legal documents and your threats, and you can leave. Tell my father he doesn't own me anymore. Tell Doyle Crane he never had a wife, just a prisoner who escaped. And tell them both that if they want me, they'll have to send more than 3 hired thugs." The man's facade of politeness cracked. "You're making a mistake. We can do this easy, or we can do it hard. But either way, you're coming with us." The lady said no. This from one of the ranch hands, a young man named Charlie who Amelia had seen around town. "And we heard her. All of us. So you got witnesses now that she don't want to go." "This is a private family matter." "Seems pretty public to me," Bill chimed in. "Got a dozen witnesses who all heard the same thing. Woman says she don't want to go, you try to take her anyway. That's kidnapping, friend, and we don't take kindly to that around here." The three men exchanged glances, clearly reassessing. They'd expected a lone woman, maybe a sympathetic rancher they could intimidate or buy off. They hadn't expected an entire community standing against them. The leader's hand moved toward his coat, and suddenly Rowan's rifle was in his hands, not pointed directly at anyone, but positioned in a way that made its presence impossible to ignore. "I wouldn't," he said softly. "Unless you're faster than you look, that hand comes out with anything but empty fingers, and you're not riding back to whatever hole you crawled out of." The man froze, then slowly moved his hand away from his coat, holding both hands up in a gesture of peace. "We're just trying to help a confused woman get the care she needs." "I'm not confused." Amelia stepped out from behind Rowan, and this time he let her, though she could feel his tension radiating like heat. "I know exactly what I'm doing. I left an abusive situation. I traveled across the country to find my son. I've been working on this ranch for a week, helping, contributing, being part of a community. I'm not running away from treatment. I'm running toward the life I should have had all along. Your father will just send more men, lawyers, judges, people with real authority. Not just," he gestured dismissively at the assembled townspeople, "local yokels who think they know better than the law." "Let him send them." Amelia felt Rowan move closer to her side, felt his solid presence giving her strength. "We'll deal with each one as they come, but I'm telling you now, and you can tell him, I will never stop fighting. I will make this so difficult, so expensive, so publicly embarrassing that eventually it won't be worth it anymore. I'll tell anyone who'll listen about being locked in that asylum, about the forced marriage, about every single thing he did to control me, and I'll keep telling it until someone believes me. No one will believe the word of a woman declared mentally unstable over respected men like your father and your husband. Maybe not in Boston. This from Widow Henderson, who'd appeared at the edge of the crowd. But here in Wyoming, we judge people by what we see with our own eyes. And what I see is a strong young woman who's worked harder in 1 week than most fine ladies would in a year, who nursed a sick child through the night when she could have walked away, who's earned the respect of this community through her actions, not her name or her money. So if you're asking us to choose between believing her or some fancy papers from back east, I know which way we're leaning. A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. The 3 men looked increasingly uncomfortable, outnumbered and outmaneuvered by people they'd clearly underestimated. "This isn't over," the leader finally said, pulling his horse back. "Mr. Ward has resources you can't imagine. He'll crush this entire town if he has to." "Then he'll find Wyoming territory is harder to crush than he thinks," Rowan said. "We're used to fighting for what's ours out here, and she's ours now, part of this community, under our protection. So you tell Ward and Crane that they're not dealing with one scared woman anymore. They're dealing with all of us." The 3 men wheeled their horses and rode away, and a cheer went up from the assembled townspeople. But Amelia couldn't celebrate. She knew this was just the beginning. Her father wouldn't give up this easily. He'd send lawyers, like the man had said, maybe even bring criminal charges against Rowan for harboring a fugitive wife. The legal battles could drag on for years, but when she looked at Rowan, at the fierce pride in his eyes, and thought of Tobias waiting inside, she knew it would be worth it. Every fight, every struggle, every battle, it would all be worth it to stay here with them. "Well," Bill said, breaking the tension, "that was exciting. Who wants coffee?" The crowd dispersed slowly, people stopping to squeeze Amelia's shoulder or shake Rowan's hand, offering words of support and solidarity. When they were finally alone, Rowan set the rifle down and pulled Amelia into his arms. "That was either the bravest or the stupidest thing I've ever seen," he murmured into her hair, "standing up to them like that." "Probably both." She clung to him, letting herself shake now that the danger had passed. "I meant what I said. I'm not running." "I know, I believe you." He pulled back enough to look at her face. "Which is why we're doing this right. We're riding to Cheyenne tomorrow, filing for an annulment and making this legal. No more pretending, no more uncertainty. I want you here as my wife, not just as someone staying temporarily. Rowan, the annulment could take months, years even. Then we wait. But we start the process now, and we do it right. I won't have anyone saying you're living in sin or that Tobias is being raised by an unwed couple. This community has been good to us, but there are limits to their tolerance. We need to show we're doing everything properly. What about what we want? What about—" He kissed her, stopping the words on her lips. When he pulled back, his eyes were intense. "What I want is to wake up every morning with you beside me. What I want is to watch Tobias grow up with his real mother. What I want is to build a life with you, legally and properly, so that no one can ever take you away again. That's what I want. What do you want?" "The same," she whispered. "Exactly the same." "Then we fight for it, together, whatever it takes." They went inside to find Tobias peering out his bedroom window, his face pressed against the glass. When he saw them, he scrambled down and ran into the kitchen. "Did you win? Are the bad men gone?" "For now," Amelia said, kneeling to gather him close. "But baby, I need to tell you something. Those men might come back or send other people, and it might get scary sometimes. But no matter what happens, Papa and I are going to keep fighting to stay together. All 3 of us. Do you understand?" "I understand." He looked between them with solemn eyes. "We're a family, and families stick together even when it's hard." "Exactly right," Rowan ruffled his hair. "You're a smart boy." "Papa, can I call her Mama now, since she's really my mama?" The question stopped them both. They looked at each other over Tobias's head, and Amelia saw the same conflict in Rowan's eyes that she felt in her heart. It would make things more complicated if they were calling her Mama while she was still legally another man's wife. But they'd spent 4 years denying the truth, and it had almost destroyed them all. Yes, Rowan said finally. Yes, you can call her Mama. The word, when Tobias said it, felt like a benediction. Mama. He tested it out, then smiled. I like it. It sounds right. That night, after Tobias was asleep and the ranch was quiet, Amelia and Rowan sat on the porch watching the stars emerge one by one. She'd moved her few belongings from the boarding house that afternoon, and they were piled in the corner of their room. She'd sleep on the sofa until they were properly married, they'd agreed. It was improper enough that she was living here at all without adding fuel to any fires. Do you think they'll be back? She asked. Probably. Maybe not those three specifically, but others. Rowan took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. Your father sounds like the type who doesn't give up easily. He's not. When he wants something, he's relentless. She thought of the years of control, of manipulation, of slowly tightening restrictions that had started long before she'd even met Rowan. But I'm relentless too. He just never knew it because I was always too scared to show him. You're not scared anymore. I'm terrified, she admitted, but I'm not letting the fear control me. There's a difference. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the night sounds of the prairie surrounding them, crickets chirping, a distant coyote howl, the soft rustling of wind through grass. It was peaceful in a way Boston had never been, and Amelia understood why Rowan had chosen to build his life here. Tell me about these 4 years, she said. Not the facts, but the feelings. What it was really like. Rowan was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. Then slowly he began to talk. The first year was the hardest. I was so angry, Amelia. At you, at myself, at the world. I'd wake up every morning and for just a second I'd forget. And then reality would crash back and I'd have to remember all over again that you were gone. That you'd chosen to leave. Or I thought you had. He paused, his thumb rubbing circles on the back of her hand. Tobias saved me. Having to take care of him meant I couldn't just give up. I had to get out of bed, had to cook meals, had to pretend everything was okay, even when I felt like I was dying inside. And gradually, pretending turned into surviving, and surviving turned into actually living again. Not happily, but living. Did you ever think about trying to find someone else? Another woman? No. The answer was immediate and definite. I couldn't. Every woman I met, I'd compare them to you, to what I thought you'd been, and they'd all fall short. It wasn't fair to them or to me, so I just stopped trying, figured it was better to be alone than to try to replace something irreplaceable. Amelia's throat tightened. I'm sorry I put you through that. Don't. Don't apologize for something that wasn't your fault. He brought her hand to his lips, kissed her knuckles gently. I'm just glad you're here now, that we have a chance to do this right. It's going to be hard, the legal battles, the community judgment, everything. I know, but hard is better than impossible. And without you here, that's what it felt like. Like I was living an impossible life, going through motions without meaning. He turned to face her fully. I love you, Amelia. I never stopped, even when I thought I hated you. Even when I tried to convince myself I'd moved on, I never stopped loving you. I love you too. I never had the luxury of trying to stop. Loving you was the only thing that kept me sane when everything else was trying to drive me mad. He kissed her again, slow and sweet and full of promise. Not the desperate kiss of people who thought they might lose each other, but the patient kiss of people who knew they had time, who knew that whatever came next, they'd face it together. When they finally pulled apart, Rowan rested his forehead against hers. We're going to get through this. I know. And when we do, when you're legally free and we're properly married, I'm going to make sure you never regret choosing this life. Choosing us. I could never regret it. This is everything I wanted 4 years ago and thought I'd lost forever. Being here with you, with our son, building a life together, it's more than I dared hope for when I stepped off that train. The crying bride at the station, Rowan said with a soft laugh. If someone had told me that day where we'd end up, I wouldn't have believed them. Would you have given me a chance? If you'd known the truth from the beginning? I would have given you anything. I still will, forever, if you'll let me. Forever sounds perfect. They stayed on the porch until the night grew cold, wrapped in each other's arms, talking softly about plans and hopes and the future they'd build together. And when they finally went inside, when Amelia settled on the sofa and Rowan reluctantly went to his own room, she felt something she hadn't felt in 4 years. Hope. Real, solid, unshakable hope that maybe, just maybe, they'd actually won. That the worst was behind them, and all that remained was building the life they'd always deserved. She was wrong, of course. The worst wasn't behind them yet. Not quite. But that night, wrapped in borrowed blankets in a house that was becoming home, with her son sleeping safely down the hall and the man she loved just a room away, she let herself believe it. And for that one perfect night, belief was enough. The morning they were supposed to leave for Cheyenne dawned gray and cold, with clouds hanging low enough to touch. Amelia woke before sunrise to find Rowan already up, checking supplies and preparing the wagon. She joined him in the pre-dawn darkness, her breath misting in the frigid air. "You don't have to come," he said without looking up from the harness he was adjusting. "I can handle the legal paperwork myself. I'm coming. This is my fight as much as yours. It's going to be a hard trip. 2 days there, at least a day dealing with lawyers, 2 days back. That's a week away from Tobias. Mrs. Patterson already agreed to stay with him. He'll be fine." She moved closer, placing her hand over his on the leather strap. "We do this together, Rowan. That's how it works now." He finally looked at her, and in the dim light she could see the worry etched into his features. "I just want to keep you safe, both of you. And every time we leave this ranch, every time we put ourselves out there, I feel like we're giving your father another chance to—" The sound of hoofbeats cut through his words. Multiple horses, coming fast. They both turned toward the road, and Amelia felt her stomach drop. It was too early for visitors, too early for anything good. But as the riders emerged from the morning mist, she realized these weren't her father's men. The lead rider was a woman in a traveling coat, flanked by 2 men who had the bearing of lawmen rather than hired thugs. Behind them came a wagon with official territorial markings. Rowan's hand moved instinctively toward his rifle, but the woman raised her hand in a gesture of peace. "Mr. Callahan? My name is Judge Elizabeth Cartwright. I've come from Cheyenne. May I have a word?" A judge. Here. Amelia's mind raced through possibilities, none of them good. Her father must have moved faster than they'd anticipated, must have already filed legal complaints. They were going to take her right now, before she and Rowan could even mount a defense. "Amelia Ward?" The judge had dismounted and was approaching, her sharp eyes taking in every detail. "Or should I say Amelia Crane?" "I prefer Ward." Amelia lifted her chin, refusing to show the fear coursing through her. "The name Crane was forced on me." "Yes, I've heard the allegations." Judge Cartwright pulled a folder from her saddlebag. "Which is actually why I'm here. May we speak inside? This concerns legal matters that are best discussed in private." Rowan stepped protectively in front of Amelia. "Anything you need to say, you can say it out here. I want witnesses." "Mr. Callahan, I'm not here to arrest anyone. I'm here because 3 days ago, a woman named Margaret Sullivan walked into the courthouse in Cheyenne with a rather extraordinary story. She claimed she'd helped Amelia Ward escape from an illegal imprisonment and wanted to testify on her behalf. When we investigated her claims, we found, well, perhaps we should discuss this inside after all. Where's your son?" "Sleeping," Amelia said, her heart hammering. "What does Tobias have to do with this?" "Everything, I'm afraid. But please, let's go inside. I promise you, Mrs. Ward, I'm not your enemy." They moved into the house, and Rowan quickly lit lamps while the judge's companions remained outside. Judge Cartwright settled at the kitchen table and opened her folder, revealing a stack of documents that made Amelia's breath catch. "Margaret Sullivan, the maid who helped you escape. She didn't just disappear after you left. She went to her sister in Cheyenne, who happens to be married to a court clerk. She told him everything she'd witnessed at the Crane estate, the forced marriage ceremony, the bruises on your wrists, the way you were clearly drugged during the ceremony, the conversation she overheard about keeping you compliant." The judge looked up, her expression grave. Her testimony alone would be compelling, but then we started digging deeper. She pulled out another document, Doyle Crane's business records. It seems your father promised him a substantial dowry, $50,000, and a controlling share in Ward Manufacturing. The marriage wasn't about you at all. It was a business merger using you as collateral. I could have told you that, Amelia said bitterly. Yes, but now we can prove it, and more importantly, we can prove the marriage was never legal to begin with. Judge Cartwright slid a paper across the table. This is a sworn affidavit from the minister who performed your ceremony. Apparently, he's had a crisis of conscience. He admits that you were clearly impaired during the ceremony, that you could barely stand without assistance, that you had to be physically supported while signing the marriage certificate. He says he objected at the time, but Crane paid him $1,000 to proceed anyway, and another $1,000 to keep quiet afterward. Amelia stared at the document, unable to process what she was hearing. Why would he come forward now? Because Margaret Sullivan found him and told him you'd run away, that you were trying to start over, and that his silence was helping keep an innocent woman imprisoned. He's older now, worried about his soul, and apparently that was enough to override his fear of Crane's retaliation. The judge pulled out yet another document. And then there's this, a letter from the asylum where you were kept. The director, when presented with a court order, admitted you were held there against your will for 3 years. No legal commitment papers, no psychiatric evaluation beyond one clearly falsified by a doctor your father paid. Just a father's word that his daughter was unstable and needed containment. That's illegal, Rowan said, his voice tight with barely controlled rage. Extremely illegal, which is why your father is currently under investigation for false imprisonment, conspiracy, and a dozen other charges. Crane is facing charges for marriage fraud and human trafficking, and the doctor who falsified your psychiatric records has already been arrested. Judge Cartwright leaned back in her chair. Mrs. Ward, I'm not here to take you back. I'm here to tell you that you're free. The marriage to Crane has been annulled by emergency court order. The charges against your father mean he has no legal authority over you anymore. You're a free woman. The words didn't make sense. Amelia heard them, but they seemed to be in a foreign language, something her brain couldn't quite translate into meaning. Free? Completely. And as for your son, the judge nodded toward the hallway where Tobias's bedroom door was still closed. I've reviewed the circumstances of his birth and your separation. A family court judge in Cheyenne has already ruled that you were deprived of your parental rights through illegal coercion. As of yesterday, you are legally recognized as Tobias Callahan's mother with full parental rights. Amelia felt her legs give out. She would have hit the floor if Rowan hadn't caught her, lowering her into a chair. How? How did this happen so fast? Because once we started investigating, everyone involved started talking to save their own skins. The house of cards your father built collapsed in less than 48 hours. Margaret Sullivan's testimony was the first crack, and everything else followed. Judge Cartwright's expression softened slightly. I've been a judge for 15 years, Mrs. Ward, and I've seen a lot of cases involving powerful men who think they can buy their way out of consequences. But every so often, the system actually works the way it's supposed to. This is one of those times. What about my father? What happens to him? He's awaiting trial in Boston. Given the evidence, he's looking at significant prison time. As for Crane, he's actually fled the jurisdiction. There's a warrant out for his arrest, but he's somewhere in Canada as far as we can tell. The judge began gathering her papers. You may be called to testify at the trials, but that's months away. For now, you're free to live your life however you choose. Rowan's arms had wrapped around Amelia from behind, holding her upright as much as holding her close. Just like that? He asked, his voice rough with disbelief. After everything they put her through, after 4 years of hell, it just ends? The legal part ends. The healing part. That takes longer. Judge Cartwright stood, preparing to leave. But yes, Mr. Callahan, just like that. Justice is rare, but when it comes, it tends to come swiftly. She paused at the door, then turned back. For what it's worth, Mrs. Ward, what you did, escaping, fighting back, refusing to give up, that took extraordinary courage. A lot of women in your position would have broken. You didn't. You should be proud of that. After the judge left, Amelia and Rowan sat in stunned silence. The sun had fully risen now, spilling golden light through the kitchen windows, and somewhere down the hall, Tobias was starting to stir. They could hear his small feet hitting the floor, the creak of his door opening. "Mama?" his sleepy voice called out. "Papa, why is everyone up so early?" Amelia looked at Rowan, and something passed between them, joy and relief and disbelief all mixed together. "Because we have good news, baby," she called back. "Come here." Tobias padded into the kitchen in his nightshirt, his hair sticking up at odd angles. He climbed into Amelia's lap without hesitation, a gesture that still made her heart swell every time. "What good news?" "The bad people aren't going to bother us anymore," Rowan said, ruffling his son's hair. "They can't take Mama away. She gets to stay here forever." "I already knew that," Tobias said matter-of-factly. "She's my mama. Mamas don't leave." The simple certainty in his voice broke something open in Amelia. She buried her face in his hair and let herself cry. Not tears of grief this time, but of relief and joy and the overwhelming realization that it was really over. She was free. They were safe. They were together. The days that followed had a dreamlike quality, as if reality was still catching up to what the law had declared. Amelia kept expecting someone to arrive and tell them it was all a mistake, that her father had found a loophole, that she needed to go back after all. But the days turned into a week, and then two, and no one came. The story spread through Sweetwater like wildfire. The wronged woman, the forced marriage, the powerful man brought to justice. If there had been any lingering gossip about Amelia's presence at the ranch, it evaporated in the face of the truth. She went from being a scandal to being a symbol, and while she hated the attention, she couldn't deny it made life easier. Widow Henderson was particularly gleeful about the whole thing. "I knew you were telling the truth," she crowed. "I told everyone, but did they listen? No. Now look at them, falling all over themselves to welcome you properly." The town's acceptance manifested in practical ways. Women started stopping by the ranch with casseroles and offers to teach Amelia how to preserve food for winter. Men came to help Rowan with repairs he'd been putting off, claiming they were just being neighborly but clearly wanting to show their support. Even the bank manager, who'd been coolly professional when Rowan had inquired about a loan for spring planting, suddenly became effusive about the ranch's prospects. But the best gift came from Mrs. Patterson, who arrived one afternoon with a box wrapped in brown paper. "This belonged to my daughter," she said, pressing it into Amelia's hands. "She died young, never got to wear it. I'd be honored if you would." Inside was a wedding dress, not elaborate like the silver monstrosity Amelia had arrived in, but simple and beautiful, cream-colored cotton with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs, the kind of dress a woman might choose for herself, not have forced upon her. "Mrs. Patterson, I can't—" "You can and you will. That man of yours has been dropping hints all week about wanting to make things proper. Well, now you're free to do so, and you'll do it right, in a dress chosen with love instead of coercion." The wedding was set for the first Saturday in November, giving them just enough time to prepare. They'd planned to keep it small, just family and close friends, but the guest list kept growing as more and more people insisted they wanted to be there to witness it. Finally, they gave up trying to limit it and just invited the whole town. The day before the wedding, a telegram arrived from Boston. Amelia's hands shook as she opened it, still expecting bad news, but the message was brief and impersonal. Father sentenced to 15 years. Crane arrested at the Canadian border. All ward assets frozen pending legal resolution. A state lawyer will contact you regarding your inheritance. Congratulations on your freedom. Margaret Sullivan. 15 years, Amelia said aloud, trying to process it. He'll be an old man when he gets out, if he survives that long. Rowan looked up from where he was teaching Tobias to tie a proper knot. "How do you feel about that?" "I don't know. I thought I'd feel something. Satisfaction, vindication, maybe even pity. But mostly I just feel empty. Like that chapter is finally closed and I can stop carrying it around." "That's probably healthy." "Is it?" She sank into a chair, the telegram still clutched in her hand. "He's my father. Shouldn't I feel something more?" "He stopped being your father the moment he locked you away. Now he's just a man facing consequences for his actions. You don't owe him anything, Amelia. Not grief, not forgiveness, not even anger. You get to feel however you feel, and that's enough." She looked at him. This man who'd learned to raise a child alone, who'd built a life from nothing, who'd somehow found it in his heart to forgive her for leaving even when he'd thought it was her choice. How did you get so wise? 4 years of hard living and harder thinking. He smiled, but there was sadness in it. I had a lot of time to work through anger and blame and all the ugly feelings that come with loss. Eventually, I realized that holding on to that stuff was just poisoning me. The only way forward was to let it go. And you did? Just let it go? Not all at once. A little bit every day. And some days I had to let go of the same thing over and over because it kept coming back. He set down the rope he'd been using to demonstrate knots and came to kneel beside her chair. But yeah, eventually I let it go. And tomorrow, when we stand in front of everyone and make promises to each other, that's me letting go of the last piece. Choosing to trust again. Choosing you again, but this time knowing exactly what that means. I choose you too, she whispered, and I promise I'll spend the rest of my life being worthy of that choice. You already are. The wedding day arrived with perfect autumn weather, crisp and clear with a sky so blue it hurt to look at. The ceremony was held outdoors in the field behind the church, where someone had erected an arch woven with late-season wildflowers and dried wheat. Chairs had been set up in rows, and it seemed like every person in Sweetwater County had come. Amelia got ready in the church's back room with Widow Henderson and Mrs. Patterson fussing over her dress and hair. She wore the cream cotton dress Mrs. Patterson had given her, and someone had found a circlet of preserved flowers for her hair. She looked at herself in the small mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back, confident, hopeful, no longer haunted by the weight of the past. "You ready, girl?" Widow Henderson asked. More than ready. Bill Crandall, who'd agreed to give her away in the absence of any family, offered his arm. They walked through the church and out the back door, and Amelia got her first clear view of the gathering. There must have been 100 people there, all turned to watch her approach. But she only had eyes for the 3 figures at the front. Rowan stood beneath the flower arch wearing his best suit, which wasn't saying much, but he'd brushed it clean and someone had convinced him to tie his hair back properly. He looked nervous and proud, and so handsome it made her heart skip. And beside him, bouncing excitedly, was Tobias in a small suit that matched his father's. The parson began the ceremony with traditional words, but Amelia barely heard them. She was too focused on Rowan's face, on the way he was looking at her like she was the answer to every prayer he'd ever spoken. When it came time for vows, they decided to write their own. Rowan went first, his voice steady, despite the emotion she could see in his eyes. "Amelia, 4 years ago I thought I'd lost you forever. I thought I'd have to spend the rest of my life wondering what I did wrong, how I failed to keep you safe. But you came back. Against all odds, you fought your way back to us, and now I stand here promising you that I will never let anyone hurt you again. I will protect you, cherish you, and love you for all the days we have left. You and Tobias, you're my family, my whole world, and I promise to be worthy of the gift you've given me by choosing to stay." Amelia had to take a moment to compose herself before she could speak. "Rowan, when I stepped off that train, I was broken. I'd spent 4 years being told I was crazy, that what I remembered wasn't real, that the love we shared was just a delusion. But then I saw Tobias, and I saw you, and I knew I wasn't crazy. I knew that love that's strong doesn't just disappear. You gave me a chance when you had every reason not to. You let me prove myself. You let me be a mother to our son. And now you're giving me the greatest gift of all, a future. I promise to spend every day of that future showing you that I was worth the risk. I promise to work beside you, to raise our son with you, to build a life that honors everything we survived to get here. I love you. I never stopped, and I never will." The parson pronounced them married, and Rowan kissed her while the crowd erupted in cheers. Tobias wedged himself between them, insisting on being part of the hug, and the 3 of them stood there wrapped in each other while the community celebrated around them. The reception that followed was held in the town square, with tables set up and food brought by every family in attendance. There was music and dancing and more well wishes than Amelia could keep track of. At one point, she found herself standing alone for a moment, watching Rowan spin Tobias in circles while the boys shrieked with laughter. "Quite a journey you've had." Judge Cartwright had appeared beside her. Amelia hadn't realized she'd been invited, but she was glad to see her. "From that train station to here. Should make quite a story someday." I'm hoping the exciting part is over, Amelia said. I've had enough adventure for one lifetime. Something tells me life with those two will never be boring. The judge smiled. But it'll be good. You've earned that. All three of you. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, people started heading home. The Callahans, all three of them now, officially, rode back to the ranch in their wagon. Tobias fell asleep between them, exhausted from the excitement, and Rowan and Amelia sat in comfortable silence. "Thank you," she said finally. "For what?" "For giving me a second chance, for letting me be part of your lives, for—" "Amelia." He reached over Tobias's sleeping form to take her hand. "You don't have to thank me for letting you be part of a family you were always meant to be in. You're not a guest here. You're not someone I'm doing a favor for. You're my wife, Tobias's mother. This is your home as much as mine, more maybe since you fought harder to get here. Our home," she corrected. "Our family, our life." "Yeah." He squeezed her hand. "Our life." They put Tobias to bed together, and for the first time Amelia didn't have to say goodnight and retreat to the sofa. She followed Rowan into their room, not his, and closed the door behind them. They made love slowly, carefully, relearning each other's bodies after 4 years apart. It was tender and healing and exactly what they both needed. Afterward, lying in his arms, Amelia finally let herself believe it was real. The freedom, the family, the future. All of it was real and solid and hers. "What are you thinking?" Rowan asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her shoulder. "That I'm happy, genuinely, completely happy. I'm not sure I've ever felt this before." "Get used to it. I plan on keeping you this happy for the next 50 years. "Only 50? "Fine. 60. Maybe 70 if we're lucky." She smiled against his chest. "That sounds perfect." Winter came early that year, with the first snow falling in mid-November. The ranch settled into the quiet rhythm of cold weather life, feeding animals, maintaining equipment, staying close to the fire. Amelia learned to can and preserve, to mend clothes that would have to last, to make a little stretch into enough. She also learned about ranch finances, and the reality was sobering. They were barely breaking even, and another bad season could wipe them out completely. When she mentioned this to Rowan, he just shrugged with the fatalism of someone used to living on the edge. "We'll manage. We always do." What if we didn't have to just manage? What if we could actually thrive? That got his attention. "What are you thinking?" "Margaret's telegram mentioned my inheritance, the Ward estate assets. I don't know how much survived the legal proceedings, but even a fraction of what my father had would be substantial." She saw him starting to protest and held up her hand. "Before you say you don't want my money, hear me out. It's not about charity or me buying my way into this family. It's about using resources we have to build something better, for Tobias, for any other children we might have, for the community that stood by us when they didn't have to." "What exactly are you proposing?" Over the next hour, she outlined her idea. Use a portion of the inheritance to expand the ranch, buy more cattle, maybe invest in some of the new irrigation techniques she'd read about. Use another portion to help other struggling ranchers in the area, low-interest loans, cooperative purchasing agreements, things that would strengthen the entire community instead of just one family, and set aside enough to ensure Tobias could go to university someday if he wanted to. Rowan listened without interrupting, and when she finished, he was quiet for a long time. Finally, he said, "You've been thinking about this a lot." "I have. Because I don't want us to just survive, Rowan. I want us to flourish. I want to build something that lasts, and I want to do it together." "Together," he repeated, testing the word. I like the sound of that. They spent the winter making plans. The inheritance, when it was finally released, was larger than Amelia had dared hope. Her father's crimes had been severe enough that she'd been awarded full control of the family assets as restitution. It was more money than they could spend in several lifetimes. But they were careful with it. They expanded slowly, bought quality over quantity, invested in the community with the understanding that their success was tied to everyone else's. And gradually, the ranch began to transform from a place of bare survival into a thriving operation. Spring came with new calves and new hope. Tobias turned 5 and started school, coming home each day with stories about his friends and his lessons. He was bright and curious and so full of life that sometimes Amelia had to stop and just watch him, marveling that this perfect boy was hers. One evening in early summer, she was working in the garden when Rowan came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist. "Got some news." "Good news or bad news?" "Good, I think. Remember Charlie, the ranch hand who spoke up when those men came for you?" "Of course. He's asked for permission to court Sarah Henderson, Widow Henderson's niece." "That's wonderful, but why do you look worried?" "Because if they get married, he'll want to move into town to be closer to her family, which means I'll need to hire a new hand, which means the ranch is doing well enough that losing one worker is an inconvenience instead of a catastrophe," Amelia finished. She turned in his arms to face him. "That's amazing, Rowan. That's what success looks like." "Is it?" He looked around at the expanded pastures, the new barn they'd built, the garden that was already producing more than they could eat. "Sometimes I feel like I'm dreaming, like I'm going to wake up, and none of this will be real. You'll be gone, Tobias will be crying for his mother, and I'll be right back where I started. This is real." She took his face in her hands, forcing him to meet her eyes. "We're real, and we're not going anywhere. Promise?" "I promise. For better or worse, remember? You're stuck with me now." He kissed her, deep and thorough, until they were both breathless. "Best thing I've ever been stuck with." That night, after Tobias was asleep, they sat on the porch watching the stars. It had become their ritual, this quiet time together at the end of each day. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes they just sat in comfortable silence. But always, they were together. "I got a letter today," Amelia said, "from Margaret Sullivan." "The maid who helped you escape? What did she say?" "That she's getting married to the court clerk's brother. She wanted to thank me because apparently testifying in my case gave her courage to leave her own bad situation. She said knowing that speaking up actually helped someone made her believe she could help herself too. That's good. She deserves happiness after what she did for you. I invited her to visit, offered to pay for her train ticket. I want to thank her properly." Amelia leaned her head on Rowan's shoulder. "Funny how things work out. If she hadn't helped me, if that letter hadn't finally been delivered, if Judge Cartwright hadn't decided to investigate, so many small things that had to line up perfectly for us to end up here. Makes you believe in fate. Or in fighting for what you want until fate has no choice but to cooperate." She smiled. "Either way, I'm grateful." They sat in silence for a while, and then Rowan said, "I want another baby." Amelia sat up to look at him. "You do?" "I want Tobias to have siblings. I want to see you pregnant, to be there for all the moments I missed the first time. I want to build a big noisy family that fills this house with life." He paused, looking uncertain. "But only if you want that too. I know pregnancy and childbirth can be difficult, and after everything you've been through, I want it," she said firmly. "I want all of it. A house full of children, if we're blessed with them. I want the chaos and the noise and the love. I want to give Tobias what I never had, siblings who'll stand beside him no matter what. I want everything we can build together." His smile was brilliant in the starlight. "Then let's build it." 18 months later, Amelia gave birth to a daughter they named Margaret Hope. Margaret for the woman who'd saved her. Hope for the feeling that had sustained them through the dark years. Rowan was there for every moment, holding her hand through the pain, crying when he heard his daughter's first cry, cradling both of them afterward with a tenderness that made Amelia's heart overflow. Tobias, now 6.5, took his big brother duties seriously. He informed everyone who'd listened that the baby was his responsibility and he'd be teaching her everything important. Rowan and Amelia exchanged amused glances over his head, already able to imagine the trouble those two would get into together. The ranch continued to prosper. Word spread about their success and their willingness to help others, and slowly the community grew stronger. Young families moved to the area, drawn by the promise of good land and supportive neighbors. A new school was built. A proper doctor set up practice in town. Life was still hard. It was Wyoming territory in the 1890s, after all. But it was good. On a warm September afternoon, nearly 4 years after Amelia had arrived at that dusty train station, The Callahan family gathered in the field behind their house. It was Tobias's 7th birthday, and half the county had shown up to celebrate. There was food and music and laughter, and as Amelia watched her son run wild with his friends while Rowan held baby Margaret and chatted with neighbors, she felt a profound sense of peace. This was what she'd fought for, this moment, this life, this family. Bill Crandall appeared beside her, moving slower now with age but still sharp. "You thinking about that day at the station?" he asked. "The day you arrived?" "How did you know?" "Because I'm thinking about it too. I remember this woman in a torn wedding dress, looking like the world had chewed her up and spit her out, crying like her heart was broken beyond repair. And I remember thinking, poor thing probably won't make it a week out here." "Shows what I know." Amelia laughed. "I almost didn't make it. If Tobias hadn't recognized me, if Rowan hadn't given me a chance, but he did. And you grabbed that chance with both hands and you built something beautiful from it. That takes strength most people don't have." He patted her shoulder. "You should be proud." "I am, every single day." As evening fell and the party began to wind down, families started heading home. The Callahans waved goodbye from their porch, Tobias yawning despite his protests that he wasn't tired, Margaret already asleep on Rowan's shoulder. When the last wagon had disappeared down the road, they went inside together. They got the children settled, Tobias in his room with his new birthday toys scattered around him, Margaret in the cradle beside their bed. Then Rowan and Amelia collapsed onto the sofa, exhausted but happy. "Good party," Rowan said, pulling her against his side. "The best. Did you see how excited Tobias was about that new fishing rod? He'll have me down at the creek every day now." "Good. He needs that time with his papa." She snuggled closer, breathing in the familiar scent of him. "We should do this every year, big parties for their birthdays. Make memories they'll carry forever." "We will. We'll give them everything we can. Everything we didn't have." They sat in comfortable silence until Rowan said, "Do you ever regret it? Giving up the city, the money, the life you could have had?" Amelia didn't have to think about her answer. "Never. Not for a single second. That life wasn't mine. It was my father's. This life, with you and our children and this community, this is the only life I've ever wanted, the only one that's ever been real. Even with all the work, the early mornings and late nights and constant struggle to keep things running, especially because of that, because it means something. We're not just existing, we're building. We're creating something that'll outlast us, and we're doing it together." She tilted her head up to kiss him. "You're my home, Rowan Callahan. You and our babies. Wherever you are, that's where I belong." He kissed her back, soft and slow, pouring 4 years of second chances and hard-won happiness into it. When they pulled apart, his eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I love you," he whispered. "I loved you when we were young and foolish, and I love you now that we're older and slightly less foolish. I'll love you until the day I die, and probably beyond that too. I love you too, always have, always will." They stayed on the sofa until the fire burned low, talking about their plans for the next season, about Tobias starting to learn to ride, about whether they wanted to try for more children. Normal conversations about a normal life, made extraordinary by the fact that they'd fought so hard to have it. Eventually they went to bed and Amelia lay in the darkness listening to Rowan's breathing slow and even out as he fell asleep. Beside the bed, Margaret made small sleeping sounds. Down the hall, Tobias was probably dreaming about fishing or horses or whatever adventures 7-year-old boys dreamed about. This was her family, her real family. Not the one she'd been born into, where love was conditional and control masqueraded as care. This was the family she'd chosen and fought for and won. This was home. As she drifted off to sleep, Amelia thought about that woman who'd stepped off the train 4 years ago, broken, desperate, wearing a wedding dress that represented everything she'd lost. If she could go back and tell that woman what was waiting for her, would she believe it? Would she have the courage to take that first step toward the ranch if she knew how hard the road would be? Yes. Without question, yes. Because every struggle, every tear, every moment of doubt had led here. To this bed, this man, these children, this life. And it was worth it. God, it was worth it. The prairie night settled over the Callahan ranch, quiet except for the usual sounds. cattle lowing in the distance, wind rustling through the wheat, a coyote's lonely call. Inside the house, a family slept peacefully, safe and together and whole. And in the morning, they'd wake up and do it all again. They'd work and laugh and love and build. They'd face whatever challenges came with the certainty that they could handle it because they had each other. The crying bride who'd arrived at the station had found her way home at last. Not to a place, but to the people who made anywhere feel like home. And that was the greatest gift of all, not the freedom from the past, but the future she'd built from its ashes. A future full of hope, a future full of love, a future that was finally, completely, beautifully hers.